Big grants. Big grants. Anyone that is.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This hearing is called to order, and I recognize the presence of a quorum of committee members. Members of the committee in attendance are Council members Jamie Gautier, Kendra Brooks, Maria Quinones Sanchez, Helen Gim, and Derek Green. Thank you all for being here.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, Kathy.
I'm here.
Kathy Gilmore Richardson. Thank you. This is the public hearing of the Committee on Fiscal Responsibility and Intergovernmental Cooperation. The purpose of this public hearing is to hear testimony today on Resolution 200406. Introduce this resolution with co-sponsors, Council members Parker, Council member Green, Council member Quinones Sanchez, Council member Squilla, Council member Gilmore Richardson, Council member Bass, and Council member Thomas. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We're using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are known. In the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearings. It can also be found on phlcouncil.com. The clerk will now read the title of the resolution before this committee today.
Authorizing the Committee on Fiscal Stability and Intergovernmental Cooperation to hold quarterly hearings that include monthly reporting requirements to discuss the fiscal position and overarching social impact goals of the city as related to the 5-year plan and reporting requirements set forth in the quarterly city manager's report as submitted to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone again for being here today. My colleagues and leadership in the 5 departments, thank you for being here. I know everyone's time is precious, so I'm going to quickly try to frame this hearing for the public and then get started. We're holding quarterly hearings to discuss the financial performance and service performance of our city. The goal is to begin to connect the dots between what we spend and what we receive back in value for our communities with that spending. Today's hearing focuses on the 5 largest general fund operating departments, largest by the way of number of employees and spending. These departments represent our largest obligations. In fact, it's close to 50% of our annual budget from these 5 departments. When we talk about our fixed costs for people, programs, pensions, or healthcare, it's these departments that drive those costs. And because of that, it is really essential that we know how these departments are customer-focused, performance-driven, and efficient and effective at what they do. If they're struggling to meet our expectations, our discussions need to be focused on what to do differently to get different results. As we enter into budget hearings and as we look to the 5-year financial plan, it's these departments that have the largest impact on our costs. It's imperative that we understand how leadership manages budget and performance in these departments and how they can help us all achieve our shared goals. In preparation of this hearing, my office sent around the last 6 years of data related to spending and track performance from the quarterly city managers reports, the QCMR, and shared this information both with those testifying today and all our council colleagues. My office and I will continue to support the idea of attaching spending to outcomes and hope we can start thinking about investing tax dollars in a manner that gets us to where we want to be with a safe, beautiful, and of course, equitable city that we all deserve. So please call the first panel of witnesses. Ms. Gerber, please call the first panel of witnesses.
The first panel of witnesses will be Christine Coulter, Adam Thiel, Blanche Carney, Christopher Newman, and Ralph DiPietro.
Good morning, Deputy Police Commissioner. Welcome.
Good morning, Councilman.
Please state your name for the record and please feel free to proceed.
Yes, good morning, Councilmember Dom and members of City Council. My name is Christine Coulter, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Organizational Services for the Philadelphia Police Department, here today to testify on Resolution 200406. The quarterly city manager's report for the second quarter of FY21, which ended on 12/31/20, shows that the police department spending is the same amount as what we were budgeted for, so we are currently on track to meet our target. Thank you for allowing me to testify here today, and I'm here to answer any questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. I also want to recognize the presence of Councilmember Mark Squilla. Thank you for joining. So I have a few questions, and I'll open it up to my colleagues. Since fiscal year Commissioner 16, the police department has achieved its performance targets about 42% of the time, according to the reports. Meanwhile, the department's budget has grown 13%. How does the budget relate to the department's performance?
Well, there's obviously a direct correlation between what we can and can't do and what we try to do. But as you know, in public safety, there's a lot of other outside factors that enter into some of our performance goals. Many of them because of our effort to overachieve our stretch goals in some areas. And so we try to get to what we think is the optimal. But we also continue to do what we do within the framework of the budget that we're given and stretch to get to the goals that we're also trying to get to.
Okay, thank you. A few other quick questions. Indemnities. They seem to be an unpleasant surprise in every year's budget. If this happens annually, it seems to be part of the way the department operates. Why not budget for indemnities instead of having to appropriate dollars every time that were budgeted for other departments?
I can't think of a good reason not to. It's something that we should look to do in the future, because if we know we're going to be spending it out every year, and not only in that category, a category like Class 200, which is training, every year we have to do transfer ordinances, because even if we did the minimal training that we did the year before, the cost of that training goes up. So there are things that, in our efforts to try to not ask for money, maybe it's short-sighted in saying that, we're going to need this to accomplish these particular goals, and therefore ask for it up front as opposed to coming back at a future time asking for it.
Next question revolves around goals. So the question I have is, what activities or personnel do you believe helps you achieve your measured performance goals? And can you walk us through those goals and how they've been doing?
Well, our goals are very much tied to our department plan at both community relations and service, crime prevention, and organizational excellence. So we continue to push in those areas, and for all of those things to work, we really need to have that right combination of both sworn and civilian personnel working collectively to accomplish goals. One of the things that I think will be very helpful this year was the addition of analysts to our department. We were able to, even during the hiring freeze, to onboard more analysts, which have helped us so far and will continue to help us in our areas that we have designated as pinpoint areas. That number has grown originally from, I believe, 7 to over 40 at this point. So we are stretching it out through the city. And even though the city's numbers are higher on shooting victims and murders, we've actually experienced very good success in the pinpoint areas. Our murders are down, I want to say 25 or 30% in those areas, and shootings are up slightly, like 5%, but they are up 50% in other areas of the city. So by putting people in place with a civilian skill set, not taking officers off the street to do it, there are certainly folks that are helping us to meet our goals of both crime reduction as well as data-driven approaches to where we deploy our personnel, so that we are not over-policing a neighborhood, but deploying in a place where we know the data is taking us with a specific target in mind.
Here's my next question for you. Oftentimes when something unexpected comes up, city departments respond by requesting more money rather than working within their own budget and shifting priorities. Can you talk a bit about how the police department evaluates whether or not you can redirect current spending versus adding new money to responding to the changes in the needs, activities, or priorities? And understandably, in police, I realize it's not necessarily an option to stop doing one response for another. which is why I think it's important to ask you specifically how those decisions are made.
Listen, that's a very good question. Those decisions are part of our day-to-day process. As you can see, if you look at our quarterly overtime spending for the past 2 quarters, we got hit pretty hard with civil unrest and protests in quarter 1, but specifically in quarter 2, where our overtime has doubled in that period. But what our efforts were in quarter 3, which will end today, has really been to look to other places that we can offset that with the hope of still making our budget at the end of the year. And we're on track to do that, even with a quarter where we spent over $28 million, and half of that on protests and civil unrest and things that can't necessarily be predicted. Now, we're already planning ahead because we obviously are aware of the trial related to the murder of George Floyd going on now. So we could experience unrest, we could experience protests. Not sure whether the result will impact our citizens' behavior, but we have to be careful that we should expect to spend something and hope that we don't. The only problem where that comes in is we're already in the 4th quarter. So anything that we would have been able to juggle is somewhat limited because we're there, but we're always looking. I believe last year we started out with the multiple shooting of 6 officers shot in the 1st or 2nd month of the period. So that whole year became an adjustment to where we could either reduce spending or try to shift spending to stay with budget. And had it not been for the unrest in June of last year, we would have 5 out of 6 last 6 years came in at our target budget. So we do make those efforts throughout the year, but you're right, policing's not predictable. Sometimes things that happen 2,000 miles away have a direct impact on our ability to police and our necessity to rally more officers and deploy more officers. And if you even look at the current things that are going on now, like there's a significant demand from pretty much every area of the city for ATV initiatives. Understandably so, it frightens a lot of people. It's dangerous, it's causing problems, but they all cost money. You know, we have to operate within our contracts and we can only shift officers by a certain amount of time. So all of that goes into the planning so we can project out through August that we'll be able to continue doing that. So it really is done on a regular basis, looking at what the current needs are, trying to predict without obviously a crystal ball what those future needs or events would be, and making sure that we are shifting our money. So the necessity to come back and either request more, you know, our hope is, if anything, that our request is to move it from one classification to another in our efforts to do just that, to make sure that we're trying to balance, you know, the needs of the city and the citizens with our financial and fiscal responsibility.
Thank you. I just want to recognize Councilmember Isaiah Thomas, who is present. Good morning, Councilmember. Thanks for being here. Another, question that I'm thinking about when you were speaking. Now, I was out on the street that Saturday night in May when the violence occurred. Are we prepared? How have we prepared differently to manage any kind of escalating situation that might happen in the city, all over the city, compared to where we were last May?
Well, Councilman, we took to heart all of both the reviews, the reports, the ones that were done internally, the ones that the Controller's Office did, as well as all the public feedback that we heard at the other council hearings, we heard from community members. And we are 3 meetings already into the planning, looking forward to what could happen with this unrest, and including our partners, and right from the beginning, our partners at OEM, our partners at SEPTA Police, utilizing all the resources that we have, the District Attorney's Office, to make sure that we're as prepared as we can be. Now, with that said, obviously, if folks strike every area of the city at the same time, we're challenged by our number of resources, but there's certainly not a lack of planning. Our folks are currently doing tabletop exercises, filming them, sharing them with people that aren't working right now so they can see what the plan is, training more officers in disorder, making sure that our folks are up to speed on ICS and ensuring that that chain of command is strong. So we're doing all the preparatory work that we can, but we recognize what our limited our resources are, and we'll deploy them to the absolute best of our ability, and hope that that combination of both outreach to our communities to work with folks to say, we understand your constitutional rights, but we understand the rights of business people to not have, their businesses damaged and destroyed, and just really work with all of our city partners to encourage it to be nonviolent in the event that there is that protest. But we are way out ahead. Deputy Dales has taken the lead with the planning from the operations end and really putting together pretty much a checklist from all the critiques from the other reports, looking at, what didn't go well and what we can do to mitigate that as we move forward.
All right, thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I just want to say I know it's been a challenging year for the police department, and I think we all appreciate how hard your officers are working and they're on all the issues. And I've had several contacts with several officers, and every one of them has been really, really, really tremendous. So we do appreciate the police and appreciate what you're doing. And I'm going to go to some questions now. I think my colleague, Councilmember Maria Sanchez, has a question.
Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you very much. I also want to reiterate what Councilman Dom said, that, we value the role that the police have played during these challenging times. I want to drill down a little granular on some of the issues around the department, right? There's significant increases over this administration and over the budget. So let's speak to a couple of issues. Can you specify what are the issues related to the police contract that make managing your departments either scheduling, shift changing, or cost that is a challenge given what we're asking you to do around some of the realignment for your budget?
Yes, the contract currently states the number of times we can move officer shifts, days off, or change their schedule. Commissioner Outlaw and the city team is working to have that changed in the upcoming contract. The request that we have made were to give more managerial rights to ensure that we could have cops working at the time that's needed for the best safety of our city. But they do exist in both the ability to change somebody's schedule and the frequency that it can be done. And therefore, it necessitates a time to hire overtime to not be understaffed for something without that flexibility to move officers. So it has been over many, many years, things that were bargained where managerial rights were bargained away in lieu of raises. And now it's a contract that we are, pretty much locked into, with the exception of our ability at collective bargaining to get that as something that was changed. And over the years in some contracts, there was some flexibility change where we can now move officers six times by 4 hours with 24 hours notice, but we're limited to the number of times we can do that. It's a handful of times, and so most officers have that exhausted very early in the year, and it's not available for later times. So there are constraints. We do have to operate within the contract. When we don't, the FOP will file an unfair labor practice, and in the end, we wind up paying those officers for that time period. So it's really trying to get into the contract what makes sense for our operational needs.
And so, as management, how do you plan for these types of events, knowing those challenges? So, for example, how do we ensure that we're getting police officer assignments on straight time versus overtime as we're planning some of this? What are some of the tools that you use in that planning?
Right. That's the first effort that we do to do it on straight time, but we also have to be mindful when it's a huge event that we can't strip every neighborhood of straight time officers, that we have to make sure that we have a safe number to stay in their remaining districts. But we do staffing projections weeks in advance when we're having events, and when we know there's something scheduled, we restrict the use of vacation and days off in that period to make sure that we have everybody that's scheduled to do work. But it is a tough balance because at the end of the day, if you have a large event in Center City or large protests, we can't pull people from, everybody from East Division or West Division that are solely on straight time to not have resources there. But the planning's done weeks in advance. We're constantly looking, and even in the summer, we restrict the number of people that can be off in each vacation period so that we don't have an inordinate number if something would happen. Even the regular events, like when things are back to normal, 4th of July, Made in America, all of them strip straight time resources, but there has to be a balance in order to keep the neighborhood safe as well, where the special event or incident is not going on.
Can you provide any examples of improvements with this last FOP contract versus the others? that will help us moving forward as it relates to the managerial and assignment? Were there any improvements?
There's a few things that the commissioner is asking for, and one of them is that flexibility to change people's hours and change people's schedules. Another is the ability to transfer folks when that need arises. Right now, contractually, someone cannot be transferred out of a district or unit, lieutenant and below, without a disciplinary process or hearing happening. But the ability to do that for, the needs of deployment is something that's being asked for as well. So there are those constant asks to make sure that we can keep the city safe on straight time. But in the end, sometimes even with everybody available and every resource we need, there's still that need to supplement folks because of a special skill. You may need additional bike officers because they tend to have good success with crowd control without being threatening. We've looked at a lot of folks that, there's the horse may seem something that is different than a cop on a bike, where those cops who work in the neighborhoods on a bike have a rapport with people in the neighborhood. They're a better resource. They may not be working at that times that the event is going on or when those needs are. So therefore we have to, juggle those schedules, and that's where some of the cost comes in. It also comes in when we have to go to 12-hour days to pull entire groups down to any First Amendment activities if we're expecting there to be any civil unrest, and keeping people in the district. So it's a constant balancing act, but the contract, all the managerial rights that we would like to be able to have, we're asking for. It's a matter of what happens in that arbitration process.
So let's talk about the overtime. Over the last 5 years as chair of appropriations, we asked the department every year to give us a list of who are the highest paid overtime users. And it seems to be the same 300 folks, right? And some people doubling, almost tripling their salaries. What are we going to do different this year around aligning overtime and then being able to justify that as a need the department has, right? For me, if you have an increase of overtime, that should be tied into success, right? And what are we doing well? So how are we evaluating? Again, it's the same 300 officers every year. How are we going to better manage that so that we can show that it is tied into outcomes?
Well, Councilwoman, a lot of those people, because we review them every day, as do the managers, a lot of the folks on that list are homicide investigators. Unfortunately, with an increase of 100 homicides from year to date with the same number of folks handling it, it does incur overtime. There are people who, because of their skill set, will historically be on that list. But you're right, we have to do better. We have to make sure that every dime we spend is giving us that yield or that outcome. But when we look at the list, some of them are very predictable. Some of them obviously require more explanation. But with folks that are investigating with roughly the same number of people, 100 more jobs a year, there's a lot of overlap. And as we all know, there's days where there's 2, 3, 4 murders in a day handled by that same group of folks that are handling it. And some are murder officers, special operations officers, but we have a policy for overtime management in place that every supervisor and commander is held to make sure that they are approving it at the 2, 4, 6 hour level each day to know that what they are working is necessary. But I don't know how much change would happen in that list based on if a person changed in the assignment that they were, clearly that would be different. And some of it is voluntary overtime where some people volunteer more often than others, but it's a reality of the nature of the job that whether it's crime scene unit, homicide investigations, their volume is so tremendous that they are the folks that tend to be at or near the top of that list.
Mr. Chair, point of inquiry.
Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson.
Quickly, I just wanted to go back to what Deputy Commissioner Coulter stated regarding the 300 individuals with the most overtime are mostly homicide detectives.
Many of them are homicide detectives, yes.
Okay, and if you could just quickly on that, help us out in understanding how many, what's the rate of solving homicides year over year? Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez.
Sure. This year, it's about 51% right now. Our lowest dip in the last 3 years, I think, was like 42%. It has been climbing. We had a small dip into the 40s last year, and we're back at a little over 50% right now.
So, council member, I know there are other folks lined up. I think it's really important for the police department, as we prepare for this year's budget, to really come back with a matrix around how you're realigning your budget, right? And what are the real challenges that exist around summer schedules, overtime schedules related to summer schedules in the contract, and some real clear-cut challenges that you have in order to explain some of this. It's really hard to explain to people that the unit with the most overtime is the unit with the least outcomes, right? It's just a reality. That's not a, I know folks are working hard. Look, I work very closely with my captains and what goes on in East Division, and it's challenging, but folks are demanding that we realign and really look at this budget. And so we need to understand what are the structural challenges with the contract, what are the assignment challenges, what is the level of, as we say, desk duty situations. I know that those are all become challenges as people are either under investigation, people are out sick. Every time I talk to one of our captains, I'm always asking, what is our census, right? They may have a roster that has, 50 officers, but they only have 30 working. Those are real structural issues. Some of them are systemic, some of them are historical, and some of them we need to create some political will to change. And we can't do that if we don't understand them in that granular way, because there's a cultural challenge within the police department. We all know that, right? And again, that's not saying that we have, that the officers, again, I know so many officers who are stuck in a bad system and who enter this profession as professionals who are tired of the level of scrutiny that's coming in the police department. But unless we fix this, we're going to continue to have this conversation, and people are going to feel like it's an indictment on the profession they've chosen. And that's not what we want. We want to be able to show the citizens of Philadelphia that we can manage a $750 million budget. And so when the commissioner says we can't do this or we can't do that, when we're nearing $1 billion, we can't explain that to the residents of the city of Philadelphia. And so we need you to work with us on this and acknowledge the structural challenges, historical challenges, and what we need to do differently moving forward, and what is the political will space that needs to be created to do that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Council Member. And Deputy Commissioner, I guess if you could come back to us with those answers, that would be helpful.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to call upon Council Member Helen Ginn. This question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, Commissioner Coulter.
Good morning, Council Member.
So I wanted to just, relate it a little bit to talk about the performance areas. And this is areas that the department itself analyzed or established for itself. And, obviously, one of the concerns as we look at it through this lens is the fact that, the police department did not make any of its 7 performance target areas. And a couple of them, we're obviously well aware of, including the issue about homicides, shootings, violent crimes, burglaries, and clearance rates. But and we've had extensive conversation yesterday on all of those. But a couple of areas that I wanted to hear more from you, or for you to come back to us with, are the increase in the percent of officers that are women. The goal is over 52 point some percent, and currently only 1 out of 5 are women, with no growth over the last 5 years in that area. And then the second area is percent of officers who are officers of color. The goal was 58.4%. It's currently at 43% or so, which is about the same as it's been for the last 5 years. Could you comment a little bit about what the department is doing, what its goals are and how it's working to meet those.
Sure. If I could take you back to the history of the 52%, which was never a realistic goal, and it was based probably 5 or 7 years ago on the population of women in Philadelphia. But as our experience shows, it's not an equally desirable job for all women as opposed to all men in those numbers, but it was based on our city's population. But to give it in little context, the average amount of women on departments nationally is 11%. And we're about 22% with the hope of climbing. We just took this week, we signed a 30 by 30 pledge, which is our goal to have 30% of all of the folks that we hire female by 2030. So that gives us our time to plan and strategize and continue to climb up to that number. But we are constantly working on our recruitment efforts with females. What we recognize is some of the forms of policing and the schedules don't always coincide with the desire to have this job because you're shift work, night work, and it has hurt. Some folks that said, yeah, I'd love to be a cop, but I want to be a cop working 8 to 4, or, not my inability because of childcare or whatever the issue is. But we are pretty much double what the national average is, but not good enough. But the goal of 52%, looking at a national average of 11%, was truly a stretch goal. And it was done at the time, probably at least an administration ago, to mirror what our city population was at the time, which was 52% female.
When was the performance targets were established? I thought the department establishes the performance targets, and don't you do them regularly?
It was, but it was established years ago, and the thought was if you reduce it, it looks like they're not trying to get to it. Believe me, we do. I mean, I personally go, as do some of our team, to our orientations, really trying to encourage women to, come into our field, because there's a tremendous gift that they can give to policing, and we have some that are very, very successful and very good at it. But to keep climbing, I mean, my concern is that number where we have going down is troublesome. Like, we want to continue to be able to push it up, but we have not entered a class in the academy for quite some time because of the pandemic. So those numbers are pretty much stagnant for the year, with us gearing up to be hiring a class in May or June of this year.
Do you know what the incoming makeup of the last class that you brought in to the PPD?
I believe the last class or the one before that was like 21, but they were where we have been succeeding.
21% or 21 individuals?
There was only like 21 individuals, 19 or 21. It was the end of a list and they were ready. And that list was no minority representation at all.
Yeah, there was zero minority, and what percent were women?
I believe 20% in that area. Where we have succeeded in our last 3 years of classes is with our Latino recruitment. We have averaged about 16 to 20% Latino in our classes for the last several years, which exceeds our city's population. We haven't had that success, and some of them are women. We haven't had that success in African American or Caucasian women.
And how is the department handling sexual harassment differently, or what changes are you making or adjusting to how both sexual harassment is viewed, how officers are trained, and how you're able to better handle reporting when an officer, especially a female officer, experiences harassment?
Well, we have increased our training to where now people of the command rank go every year. Supervisory every 2, and our officers every 3 have the full training, plus the reminders in all of our municipal police officers training. Our policy has expanded to allow complaints now done by a portal where people who are fearful of coming forward or think that they could be in some way retaliated against can do it electronically. And we have put in motion, and we're close to that now, where an outside entity within the city investigates all of our EEO and harassment complaints. So there's clearly the message to those complaining that there is an independent eye looking at it, that, we are making every effort to get to the bottom of it, and that, any infractions won't be tolerated.
I mean,
Madam,
that's,
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gim, this is Councilmember Thomas. May I interject, please, just specifically around this line of questioning?
Yes, go right ahead, Councilmember Thomas.
First of all, Councilmember Gim, thank you for your line of questioning. And I normally don't do this, but I'm listening to the question around recruiting, the recruiting of women, specifically women of color. I would say a few weeks ago, my office forwarded the department, the commissioner, as well as the MDO, as well as one of my colleagues, some concerning information we seen from folks who came to us who were women of color, who had applied to be police officers in the past. And they specifically talked about issues within the recruitment in the recruitment department. I mean, we're talking about detailed narratives about how things that were taking place within the recruitment department over the last, I'll say, 2 to 7 years or so, was really problematic. And it was putting people of color, specifically women of color, in a position where not only were they not accepted when they applied for the academy, but some said that they never even got a reply to their application. So I know that this is fiscal stability, and I'm really worried about the overtime and other issues that was presented. But I just heard the line of testimony, and I just don't think that that's 100% accurate as it relates to testimony that we've received from constituents in the city of Philadelphia. So I'm wondering, and again, this is something that we've already put on the record. It's been sent to the administration as well as the police commissioner. So I'm wondering, what are we doing about some of the issues that were taking place in the recruitment department, specifically if we have documentation that says that the recruitment department participated in an activity that we all know was problematic, and simultaneously was not doing what they're supposed to do as it relates to recruitment and women of color who have applied to the department.
Councilman Thomas, I haven't seen your letter, but I will look to get it from the commissioner and make sure that it's shared with Deputy Wimberly, who is over recruitment and recruit background. I think what you're explaining more is recruit background, not recruitment itself. But clearly, if there's issues, they should be investigated. I know that Deputy Wimberly, and she has Captain McCoy there now, are taking a very hard look at the entire process to make sure that there is a fairness to everyone, and that, there's a expectation of reasonableness that if somebody made a mistake in the recent past, and if distant past, that doesn't prohibit them from being on the job based on state guidelines, that they should be included. So if I'll take a look at the letter, make sure Deputy Wimberly has it, but I know that she's making great efforts with our recruitment folks to not only recruit folks to the profession, but to help them through. One of the things that they're doing now is giving folks time in between, because I just attended an orientation last week where they come up for the reading test, which is currently the Nelson Denny test. Working with some folks at the Police Foundation, we are going to be looking at that test itself, because there are some folks that believe that that test could be biased. Now, that's what the state makes us give at the current point, but we can make those appeals. So I know that there have been candidates that have complained in the past, and I'm sure rightfully so, about parts of the process or things that have happened to them. But I know that Deputy Wimberly and Captain McCoy are working tirelessly to try to not only encourage people into our profession, but find a way to keep them and make them feel valued. And especially people from our neighborhoods, knowing that with Council President Clark's bill that folks must live in Philadelphia for a year prior to being hired. It's certainly incumbent upon us to work very hard in our neighborhoods to encourage people to want to be police officers. There's no outside pool feeding in any longer.
All right.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to dominate the conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Gim. And I do want to continue to have a conversation at another time about this issue. Sorry about that.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Thomas. Let's go back to Councilmember Gim and let her finish her questions.
Thank you very much. We were talking about sexual harassment and how the department is handling it differently, in part because, again, while I appreciate and recognize your concerns about the goal of the 53%, the reality is we also haven't made strides on the 30% goal by 2030 over the last 5 years, and not quite in the current class. And I'm also very concerned about the broader issue that's been raised among female officers. And, Deputy Commissioner Coulter, I know and appreciate the fact that as a woman in leadership at the department, we're just trying to think of ensuring that the women who are on the force are protected, and that their concerns can be met. And, we were active in, in trying to ensure that some of these investigations occur separately. But just to clarify again, if there is an incident of sexual or racial harassment in the force, these go to an outside agency automatically, or are there multiple venues by which an officer may lodge a concern or a complaint?
They can lodge a complaint on the state, federal, or local level, but we now have our city department handling the police EEO or sexual harassment complaints and doing the investigation. Before, it was housed within our Office of Professional Responsibility, but there was a recognition that there are some folks that aren't comfortable being interviewed by people within their own department. There's always that cultural fear that somebody may know somebody, pass on something that was said. So working with Office of Law Department and Labor to have an outside, not outside the city, but outside our department, do those investigations would give that additional look to it, where there isn't that feeling that I'm not going to get a fair shake or I'm not going to be listened to. And I can tell you that a little while back, I held a roundtable with female officers, just brought them in and asked them to talk about, things that happened in their career. And clearly, there were some troubling stories about folks from the far past as well as recent about feelings that they had or how things weren't handled, or they felt that they weren't taken seriously or handled. So I know the Commissioner Outlaw and our entire executive team view this as obviously one of the most egregious things that could happen to any of our employees, and ensuring that their reports are taken seriously, they're investigated, and that we make sure that we remove from our environment anybody who could be a predator or a harasser.
Okay. And then, all of us are obviously deeply concerned about the most recent cadet force having 0 minorities, people of color. What are the department's current activities to recruit a more diverse group of officers, especially as we are going to be heavily reliant, as we heard yesterday, on addressing relationships within communities that, do not feel like they can trust the police or, be able to confide. And, what are your current practices? And that includes, really emphasizing more local relationships here in the city.
I know in the past couple of weeks that I've seen evidence of our recruitment teams, instead of doing those larger scale recruitment fairs, they're going into neighborhoods, pretty much setting up on street corners, whether they be in West Philadelphia or North Philadelphia, engaging with folks who may not have been thinking at the time they walked by of policing as a profession, but starting to build those relationships and looking for those folks to come. Now, seeing the orientation, or at least a reading test portion for the last several weeks, I was up there a couple days a week for another matter at the training bureau. It is a very diverse group that's been coming in, and they've had very good success with the reading portion. They have to do the PT portion upcoming. But looking at the folks coming in, I think we're reaching that target. And just last week, when I spoke with the commissioner about getting a class ready, the first thing that she said is, let's make sure this class is very diverse. So it's a conscious effort on all of our parts to make sure that we are not only recruiting, but getting them through the process, whether it's through peer support on the PT. A lot of folks, have trouble with those requirements. And just so I'm clear, they're not the Philadelphia Police Department requirements, they're the state MPO commission. So it's not, clearly we would like to see some changes in that. And we are working with our partners at the state police to say that if somebody is 3 seconds short of running a mile and a half in a certain amount of time, that necessarily wouldn't make them a bad cop. So let's look to find a way to include more folks. And so it is a constant effort, but I know that Deputy Wimberly's folks are heading into the neighborhoods. They're working hard because all of our applicants have to come from Philadelphia. So that alone should start to balance the scale to make sure that we're including many people of color.
Yes. as we know, intent and practice are very, practice is basically the policy. And so, we'll be interested. I'm not going to take up more time, but we'll be at some point interested in internal growth programs, any kind of like partnership programs that you're doing with, some of your other partner agencies or anything like that. We want, obviously, people who are thinking about policing differently, and are diversifying their ways of thinking about policing and relationships and building out a broader sense of public safety. And so I'm hoping that maybe we can continue to have some conversations about internal growth programs and partnership programs that might also be helpful. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember again. I'd like to now call, actually, before I call on Councilmember Kathy Gilmore Richardson, I just had a comment. And you may be doing this already, but with today's technology, has the police department considered having Zoom career nights and Zoom instructional courses for police, virtual versus having the actual classes and recruiting from community college even?
I don't know if recruitment or background set up Zoom courses yet. We're doing it for so many other community meetings. So we've moved to that for whether it's our youth forums, whether it's our community groups, our millennials. But I don't know if that's part of the recruitment platform, but I will find out. And we had our training bureau just recently reach out to community college to look for some of our local folks who are in the criminal justice arena and taking the courses now that you say that they're obviously interested in some way, to try to entice them to keep them home, that when they do, finish their degree, not that the degree is required, but our starting age is still 22 years old. So they have to do something in that gap from when they leave high school to when they become a police officer. And community college, in fact, the commissioner had talked about a program that they had when she was in a past life in Oakland, where they partnered with their community college to look to have that be a pipeline for our training bureau, and obviously have them even ahead of the game because they'll have a criminal justice background and have a better understanding of the Constitution and law prior to coming into the academy. And as we all know, all the folks in our community colleges are our local people.
I think that'd be great if you could use community college as a pipeline for talent within the police department. Anyway, I don't want to go over any time limit. On my colleague, Councilmember Kathy Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to have this hearing and to continue to drill down on a number of these issues. And I wanted to especially thank my colleagues, Councilmember Quinones Sanchez and also Councilmember Gim, because your questions are greatly aligned with the line of questions that I had prepared for this morning. But Deputy Commissioner Coulter, before I get started, I wanted to thank you, for the information, but also pause to say thank you to Captain McKeever in the 19th Police District, who joined us for a walking tour of the 54th Street corridor with my colleague and District Council member Curtis Jones Jr. And we appreciate him working with the Winfield Residents Association and the Winfield Community Association, the Black Captains Community Association. So I just wanted to thank him for his work. I wanted to get a few things on the record this morning as we move forward and towards our budget hearings. For your department's budget, how much is Class 100 from a percentage perspective? How much does Class 100 account for in your budget?
I believe it's about 92%. I can get back to you with the exact numbers, but it's the majority of our budget between salary, benefits, and overtime.
Okay, so salary, benefits, overtime, all of Class 100 accounts for approximately, and you'll get back to us, 92% of your budget.
Yes.
Okay, and then I wanted to specifically go back to the recruiting issue, because I do think what my colleague, Councilmember Thomas, has stated is in line with the letter that my office, signed by a number of my colleagues, sent to the administration on January 11th. It is our understanding that one of the individuals that allegedly or may have participated in the insurrection against the United States of America is a member of the police department and is in charge of, determining, who moves forward in the recruitment process for the police department. And it is also my understanding that this individual undersigned some of the communication that potential, police academy individuals receive when they are not selected to move forward in the process to potentially become police officers. So I say all that to say that I do think we need to take a deep dive into the recruitment practices, and I'm thankful that my colleague talked about specifically the demographics of the recruiting classes, because I do have a picture in my office even before we left from COVID with the last class where there were no minorities in one of the last classes when we were first inaugurated into council. So I wanted to go deeper there. The last 5 recruiting classes, could you give us the demographics on paper of the last 5 recruiting classes with the police department? If you could break it down, not only by the amount of females and not just minority numbers, if you could break it down by how many African Americans, how many Latino, how many Asian, and just go down in that way. That would be exceedingly helpful for us to see the last 5 recruiting classes. I recognize that you all are experiencing challenges around staffing, particularly with the amount of incidents we've had in the city and just the overall challenges that we're facing. But I wanted to zero in on planning and go back and talk about the census numbers. How many police officers do we currently have in the city of Philadelphia?
Today's total, I believe, is 6,100. Give me 1 second, Councilwoman, and I will do it. 6,133. That number changes daily, so I wanted to make sure I got you the most accurate one.
Okay, so that's the current census for today is 6,133. Yes. And of this 6,133, how many of those officers, and you can let us know if you can't share this information, are eligible to be on the street?
When you say on the street, do you mean in a uniform presence or do you mean fit for duty? Because some people are detectives.
Fit for duty, actually patrolling.
I can't give you the exact number. I could in a private correspondence, but it's significantly less than the 6,133.
Surely. So, Mr. Chair, if I can, I move that we'll be able to table that information to Executive Committee so that we can further discuss that information. Moving forward with the next line of questioning I have here, I wanted to circle back to the Police Explorers Program. As you know, I am a proponent of workforce development and ensuring that we are giving young people pathways and pipelines to employment opportunities. So I wanted to zero in on the Police Explorers Program and get an update there, and also talk about an issue that I want to connect the police department and the school district on, which is creating a police science CTE program. You talked about earlier in your testimony, Deputy Commissioner, that you are really struggling with recruitment of African Americans in the city, which is the majority of our city's population at 44%, and also the majority of the young people and children in our public school system here. So I wanted to talk about the creation of a police science, a CTE program to get more young people in the pipeline for a career opportunity with the police department. We have never had a police science CTE program, and I think it will help with, getting interest in young people at earlier ages. So is that something that you all have explored, and can you give us an update on the Police Explorers Program?
Yes, I'll go back to the first question first, because I don't know, I'm sure Councilman Dom remembers we had a conversation a few years back about looking into something similar to what the fire department does with their schools. Never got off the ground, but our explorers did expand at that point. What we found with our explorers is where our equipment, where our facility is not geographically conducive to get a lot of folks there. So we train at our academy, and we have a large core group that comes there. But a few years back, we made an effort to get explorers in each of our divisions as well, which has happened. But I don't think that it's ever been as robust as our actual program. So we do have to look at how we can replicate what we're doing with what we have, and that will probably require partnerships with maybe some of our schools or universities that also have facilities that you're not meeting at a police district, because most of ours are not really equipped to handle large number of groups. But I know a lot of that got sidelined during the pandemic. We should obviously be looking to go virtual there too. It's not as hands-on as the things, but to keep the people involved in it. But one of the issues that we face with explorers, and I think it's something that, internally or with our city and our policy we can overcome, is I think that there should be a consideration for explorers as an exemption to the age of coming into the police department, because at our age of 22, when they age out of explorers, they obviously go do something else, and we lose a lot. Not that we expect everybody that joins the police explorers to become a cop, because some of them enjoy the activity, but then they go on to do something different. But I think, speaking with our head of our explorers and some of the kids, they have to go get a job. They're out of high school. They're doing something different. By the time they're 22, a lot of them, and they're great young men and women, are settled in some, they might be working for Comcast or PICA or somewhere that now they have 2-3 years in. They don't want to leave that stable job to come make that effort to come over. But we're always looking to grow our explorers. We're always looking to partner with folks in our community that want to, assist in getting folks. Like, we've been transporting them in the divisions, trying to get them from one district to another division. And there's some challenges there, as opposed to the location where they would just initially come to. But we realized it just doesn't work for everybody. Although very diverse, our explorers at the academy, but they still don't accomplish the goals of getting kids from West Philly, North Philly, and South Philly into the program.
Sure. So I'd like to further explore that with you, particularly on the Police Explorers program. We did include the program in our first apprenticeship guidebook that was unveiled in December, and we have been disseminating that information throughout the city.
That's great.
So we'll drill down on that with you, and particularly around the what you mentioned with the exemption to the age to come into the police department if you completed the Police Explorers program. The next thing I wanted to circle back to, every fiscal year and every fiscal budget year, the police department sets target metrics for crime statistics. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So can you provide us an overall update on which targets the police department is set to meet and which targets will not be met this year?
I could get back to you with that. I realized that this year's very early in the year. I mean, we operate crime statistics on a calendar year. So we're 3 months in. Obviously, we did not get a good start with homicides or shooting victims. We are down in some of our property crimes, where we obviously hope to meet those goals. But we haven't given up, believe me, on homicides or shooting victims. We realize that we're now kind of swimming upstream because we have an increase in both. But it's only March, and it's all of our responsibility to start slowing those numbers, with the hope of still, in those next 9 months, show those decreases from our strategies, our efforts, our increased pinpoint to start reducing those numbers. But in March, I believe it will be way too early to predict which goals we would or wouldn't make crime-wise.
Sure. So I just wanted to circle back there, because we know that you can't manage what you don't measure. And every day since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, my office has shared information of the presumptive positive cases, the deaths, and even at the beginning where it was happening in the city. I know you all update the police department website on a daily basis with the amount of homicide victims. Is there a way, or is there information that could readily be shared each day with all of us around our criminal statistics in every area, and break it down by council district or break it down by police district? Meaning, do you all use that data and information to figure out how you need to change your staffing for the day?
Yes, we utilize what's considered our CompStat sheet, which we have weekly comm stats, but those numbers change daily. You know what I mean? And then at the end of the week, it's what the number is. So it's used. I mean, I agree with you. Like what gets measured gets done. And if you're looking at, that data as to how it's driving you, I mean, there's times in the course of a day you see something breaking out and, our commanders are looking right on real time. You're seeing a robbery spree occurring in, an area of West Philadelphia or Northeast Philadelphia, and you change your deployment instantly. And we also have the ability now to see where all of our officers are with their AVL. So we know where their automatic vehicle locator, to see if they are in the areas that they're being deployed into, to just make sure that, our folks are, our plan is only as good as folks that execute it. If we have a good strategy and folks are not where we need them to be. But we have daily numbers in every crime category, and it's already broken down by police district. It's not broken down by councilmatic district, but I can talk to our folks at data and analysis and see if it would be helpful if there's a way to break it down even by zip code within your district. But I realize some are even shared under a zip code as well. But look for a way to, if we work together and find out exactly what it is you're looking for, to then generate that report and send it, because the report will be different for every council person on this call, because she's all represent a different area.
Yes. And lastly, and thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for your latitude. My last question is on the remaining 8% of your budget that does not include the Class 100 portion of your budget, because we know that right now we're in the negotiation process for the next contract between the city and the Fraternal Order of Police. And I've read the initial proposal that you all submitted to the exchange, and understand that we've reached an impasse, and now we're at the point of selecting a diverse set of arbitrators, underscore, highlight, bold, diverse. So I wanted to circle back to the other 8% of your budget. If you could break down for us by class, how much each class accounts for the remainder of your budget.
Well, for class 200, it's usually about $15 million a year. For class 300, somewhere in the area of 12 to 15 million a year. Class 400 is a much smaller number, so that would probably be maybe 1 to 2 million a year, percentage wise. In fact, looking at our numbers, I was just doing the math here. Our class 100 is closer to 95%.
Okay, so class 100 is closer to 95%, which is salary, benefits, and overtime.
Yes.
Okay.
So the remaining ones, and if you look at our next biggest category is class 200, and that encompasses our contracted services, a lot of our training and stuff like that. And there's things that we have like an annual fixed cost, because like we have to recertify our pilots every year to fly our helicopters. Those are things that we just can't negotiate. So they're in our budget. We need to do it every year. This year, we contracted with Dr. Marks, which was pretty expensive to bring implicit bias to every member of our department, sworn and civilian. So that comes under class 200 as well, something that we hadn't done in the past, and then juggling some of the things that existed in order to make sure that we can financially cover it, but recognizing how important it was that when we were looking not to check a box with implicit bias, but to get who we believed would be the best person to come to our department. We actually brought him in for 3 days prior to hiring him, had him do 3 classes of 50, included members of the PAC Commission in those classes, some folks to say, is this really what we're looking to deliver? Got very high marks, and then had to look to put him under contract. And he's currently done about 1,500 members of our department, and coming back right after Easter to continue on. So those are some of the things that are costs that, although they're very expensive, it's more costly to not do them, in my opinion. So you have to figure out a way to work that in as well.
Okay, and my last question will be around reallocating resources within your budget, and how you all are thinking about that in advance of the budget hearings, and specifically what areas you believe you can achieve savings this year.
Well, we're looking at everything now. Commissioner Outlaw has pretty much mandated that nothing's off the table, looking whether we can find any redundancies or inefficiencies in our current structure, looking at ways to make sure that, we're operating at peak efficiency and that we don't have a particular units replicating each other's work. So we're looking at the entire department. Commissioner Outlaw, just being here a year, has had the opportunity now to look at some things and bring some past experience to find out what that structure should look like. So, we are constantly looking, but now putting to paper some of the ideas that we really think may make us more efficient and therefore save some money in other areas.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner, and thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Council Member. I just want to clarify the QCMR, is that measured on fiscal year, not calendar year? Is that correct?
Yes.
And then the other question I just wanted to clarify, in the class 100 figures I have for fiscal year 21, the overall police budget was down from 740 from 20 to 727 million for fiscal year 21. The class 100 was 704 million. Does that include fringe benefits, pensions, etc.?
Yes. All of class 100 includes all of the not pensions. Pensions a whole different fund, but it includes salary benefits. Our benefits, I believe, are about 30% of our officer cost. Now, if you look at our numbers from where we were from the year before, we are down about, actually like 150 from our authorized strength, but even more significantly from where our numbers were 2 years ago at our previous strength. So some of that decreases. It increases in overtime, but it decreases in benefits for officers.
Do you have any idea what the pension costs are?
I can't hear you, sir. Could you repeat that?
Any idea what the pension costs might be?
I do not have that now.
Okay. All right, thank you. We go to my next colleague who has some questions, which is Councilmember Derek Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. I just have a few questions, but one, I want to echo points made by Councilmember Thomas regarding recruitment and challenges and concerns. I know a young man that I've mentored for a long period of time that was able to, based on scholarships, go to St. Joseph Prep and then St. Joe's University, specifically with an interest in becoming a police officer, a major in criminal justice, and also started a master's degree in that space at Eastern University. When he attempted to go through the process of becoming a police officer, he was basically denied based on some of the things that I think Councilmember Thomas discussed. And I think this is an issue that's been an ongoing issue, and it's going to be an even more challenging issue based on the new requirements in reference to residency before becoming a police officer. So you're talking about, and I think you stated in your testimony, having police officers in communities on corners trying to recruit, but the very individuals who have an interest in becoming officers have denied such. So I think it's incumbent upon the police department, especially in this current climate, that which is making it even more challenging for those who are even interested in becoming officers to continue to want to pursue and then be denied. And then we have the current dynamic that's occurring. So in that regard, can you give some perspective in reference to dollars being allocated for recruitment? We talked about some of the positions, but I'm curious in reference to how dollars be allocated in the FY22 budget in that regard.
Well, the money that's allocated to recruitment for the most part falls under personnel that are assigned there on a full-time basis, both recruitment and recruit background. We actually will see a decrease in some of our outside spending because we won't be recruiting at outside universities because they will no longer have had the residency requirement to come into place. But we have officers assigned to both recruitment and recruit background, and they're two different things. So I want to be clear that recruitment is the folks that are looking to get people to join the police department. Recruit background is where it seems that the trouble is happening as to what you're communicating, where people are denied the opportunity to come. Recruitment kind of gets them in the door, and recruit background gets them into the academy. So we in the last year had very little going on in both just because of the social distancing requirements and our ability, because of things that were shut down like psychological tests, polygraphs, the ability to get people in. But this year I know that I can get you a dollar figure as to what they're spending in that area of actually recruiting other than salary of the officers that are doing it. But most of it really revolves around those human contacts, those making people want to come. And the recruitment unit is a small piece. I mean, we're all convinced that the true recruiters are every single person that wears this uniform. When they're out there in the neighborhoods, they're out there, patrolling those contacts that people make with them, make that either favorable or less than favorable decision as to this is something that I would like to be or like to do. So it's really everybody's job to recruit, but I can get you what the recruitment unit budget is. But like I said, most of that is their salary and benefits, and they do the career fairs. I know they go to Girard College and some places in our neighborhoods where they're doing actual fairs. At least they used to prior to COVID, but now they're doing much more smaller scale inside neighborhoods to make those day-to-day contacts with folks that live in the communities that we're serving.
And so I think I heard you say that those dollars will go down because of the residency.
The travel dollars, that their budget won't be cut, but the travel dollars will be less because they won't be going, to.
Right. I understand the travel dollars will be down, but couldn't those dollars allocated for travel be reallocated for other opportunities to do recruitment within the city of Philadelphia?
They absolutely will be. The recruitment budget will remain the same. They just won't be using it outside. And we even explored we worked with some of our major sports teams to put things in the cover of their magazines, because people were going to Eagles, Sixers, Phillies. But unfortunately, this year that got stalled, and we're looking to go back to that because there weren't fans in the stands. So we wanted to make sure that, our folks are looking at it from every angle and saying, hey, I'm at a Sixers game, and what do I turn to is an ad like, we want you to be part of us. But I think that will become much more robust now that we are starting to reopen some events and have, the ability to have larger gatherings.
And, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson talked about the Explorers program. That's something that she's focused on for some time. Every year I participated in PAL Day in City Hall, like a number of my colleagues. That is an opportunity to kind of start that recruitment process. I don't recall from my conversations and experience over the past number of years of that being part of the conversation, but I think that's something that we can use to open the door and also continue to track those individuals who come through the city's PAL programs, even the PAL Day, as a way to find out where are they going forward and communicate with them using technology and other means of communication about the opportunities to become a member of the police department.
Thank you.
Okay.
I agree.
Also wanted to raise some questions in reference to the budget. A lot of these things have been talked about, but I want to ask more of a macro question, similar to what I asked to the commissioner yesterday. And we've talked about the unrest that occurred last year. We're currently watching many of us the Derek Chauvin trial in Minneapolis. The outcome of that trial could cause additional unrest here in the city of Philadelphia. You talked about preparing for that and using lessons learned from last year. And then we're going to be also going through the budget process at the same time. So for those who raise the concerns in reference to the significant amount of money that goes to the police department, as my colleagues have stated, you're talking almost $750 million going to the police department. But at the same point, we're at a level of homicides that we have not seen since 1960, and many people are raising the concern, and I think rightfully so. Are we getting a return on our investment in these dollars when we don't have the clearance rates of shootings and homicides, but we have a higher number of those incidents, unfortunate, tragic killings in our city, but at the same time, people have the concern regarding what has happened in our city over the past year. So how do you address that going forward in reference to trying to do a better job of addressing these issues, but also pushing back or I would guess responding to those who have the concern that the funding that's going to the police department should be allocated in different ways?
Well, there's a lot of parts to the question, but I'll start with one in that we know how many crimes have occurred. The hardest thing to measure is the crimes that were prevented. So the work that police officers are doing, the inroads that they're making in communities, and you're seeing some of our locations that have been problematic in the past have become much, less violent in those areas. But I would submit that a job that isn't cleared yet, and the clearances occur in the year that you're in, doesn't necessarily equate to a lack of effort or a lack of work on the part of the investigator who's putting that effort into eventually clear. There are times where jobs get cleared 2 years later. You don't get that clearance. It doesn't show as what happened. But I can tell you by my experience dealing with some of the mothers of murdered children that they want that closure, whether it comes in this calendar year or not. And the effort that those folks are making to clear some of the old jobs, obviously from your work at the district attorney's office, some of the work that's put into a case folder or a homicide investigation just to get it to the point that when you make an arrest and go to trial, you can get a conviction is tremendous. And I think that effort will be paying off in the long run. It may not show in that immediate clearance, but it may be a job where, you see, we launched a website about a year ago, a little over a year ago, for our unsolved murders. Things that those detectives are still like, you don't get to just say, well, the year's over, we didn't solve it, let's not work on it anymore. I mean, those folks deserve better. The people whose families were affected in the neighborhoods where that person is still walking free needs that continued investigation. So I would say that sometimes the numbers don't match the effort. But I think if we ever stop making that effort, I think that, we are really doing a disservice to all of the people that we are, sworn to protect and serve as to continue investigating those crimes at that highest level. So yes, we would like the clearance rate to be up, but I don't know that that's an only indicator as to how hard somebody's working towards that goal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be reviewing this information in more detail when we see the actual budget detail coming out of the mayor's budget address. Thank you.
Councilmember Green, thank you very much for your questions. Let's go to Councilmember Gauthier.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning, Councilwoman.
Okay. Since we're approaching budget time, I wanted to hear your take on what investments in violence prevention, even outside of your agency, do you think would be most useful and critical in your goal of addressing the gun violence crisis that we're currently in and reducing homicides in our city?
Well, looking to some of our violence prevention partners, I think they are key. I think that we really need credible messengers, and I think investment in those right credible messengers, the ones that have proven over the years, whether that was their title or not. I was assigned for many years to West Philadelphia, and there were ladies and men who did tremendous work in that area. And we didn't have a label for them, but they have a proven history of making their neighborhoods better by having alternatives, whether it's the marching band or things that they were doing with their youth. And then those youth grew up and respected those folks. So I think that we obviously need to pursue that, not to say that we need to spend money for the sake of spending money, but identify those right people in the neighborhoods who have already demonstrated success and then partner with us so we can quell anything before it comes up. So they have that respect. I mean, we look at, the summer's coming and pools are opening. And yes, the police department tries to provide cops at pools. Some of the most effective resources at a pool could be a respected man or woman who lives in the neighborhood, who the kids, they'll have that same outcome that the police would by making sure people are following the rules and behaving themselves and stuff like that. So I think those community investments are important. I think it's important to, not just disrupt violence, but look to find the positive and make sure that we're pointing our kids and our young adults in those right directions. So I think none of that can be overstated. that the police department can prevent some crime, they can respond to it, they can handle it, but in the end, those credible messengers, the people who are respected in the community, regardless of what, I know people apply to do this, but there's some people who are already doing it and have been doing it successfully. I think those are the partners that, we really need to magnify that partnership and say, hey, for years I worked with Mantua Against Drugs, and those folks were very successful. And I don't even believe they had a budget. They just figured it out. They were committed to their neighborhood, and they were out day in and day out. So I think a lot of our violence prevention, CCIP, who does a great job following up in neighborhoods when one thing happens to prevent retaliation. So we have a lot of partners in violence prevention that I think continue to do good work. And I think that we need to, work with them and support their efforts to make sure that we don't turn everything into a police problem or the responsibility of the police, because I think there's some people who do that very well and have been for years.
So would you say that our ability to expand our investments in credible messengers as we move into the budget is critical to PPD's efforts to reduce homicides in the city?
I think it's certainly a valued part of it. I think that I don't think there's any one standalone thing, but I think anybody that we can get that's working with us, and we all have the same goal, is to keep our young folks alive and to, get them past the point where they are in danger and have them being contributing members of society. I think that everybody on this call and all of our invested partners in the neighborhood feel the same way. So we couldn't have too many people working, together on that to become like, when we look at what roles police should or shouldn't have, some of that has been defined just by a void. The police department becomes the default for some things. And I think that there are, good people working towards that same goal and should be working with us. So, yes, I agree. They're important.
Thank you. Are there other investments that you would add that you think are key or critical or highly important at this moment in time as we're trying to address homicides?
Well, I think some of our technology requests for homicide are important. A lot of what we can gather with regards to investigations come from phones, and not using the phone, but the ability to get into phones and analyze who, was speaking with who and what was going on. So I think that there's a few requests that we have made that will be critical. And I also believe we are just in the pilot stages of our mobility project now. We're only, just beginning it, but I think that if those numbers bear out, I think that would be a huge investment to both work with police and the community to have that constant interaction, the intelligence being provided, put out to the officers that are working on the street. And I actually look forward to the University of Pennsylvania's analysis of it once we have enough time under our belt to show that if it worked. And it's somewhat modeled over what they did in Chicago a few years back. And at that time, they experienced a significant decrease with the intelligence hubs. So I think they're all important investments, but I think human capital can't be overstated. And that's both sworn civilian, community, schools. I think that, for us to not completely partner with anybody willing to help, address somebody's needs to keep one more child from being injured or, one less person killed. I think it's, where we need to be.
Thank you. We talked a bit before about the planning that PPD is doing in preparation for the George Floyd verdict. And I think that planning is very important. Certainly, I don't want a repeat of what we saw in either May or October. It's my sense, though, that civil unrest breaks out in Philly in response to police violence in other places, it's my sense that when civil unrest breaks out in Philly in response to police violence in other places, that it's certainly about that particular event, but it's also a response to how people view policing here and how they view their relationship with police here. And so given that, do you think that our planning around the George Floyd verdict should include more than planning for officer deployment? Is there a plan, for instance, to ramp up community engagement or to communicate about reforms and accountability, particularly in the wake of the Walter Wallace Jr. shooting here in West Philadelphia?
Well, I believe they both have to be occurring simultaneously. I don't think that we will succeed with just a plan or just a community. I think we have to be ready for both. I know they're doing business outreach now, working with folks in the neighborhoods to say what we all need to work together in the community to say, like, these are your stores, they employ your sons, they just like exercise your First Amendment rights, but don't destroy anything, don't ruin anybody's properties, don't do those things. But I think that our reform, which is ongoing and we continue to make progress, and our commitment to it is real. At the same time, planning for the worst case scenario, because our citizens and our businesses own that. You know what I mean? We have to be there for that as well. So I think the outreach is important, and I think that our folks will continue to do that, whether it's through our civil affairs, our community leaders. And one of the best compliments that I hear on these calls all the time is some of our district captains are really, really getting involved with the things that are going on in their community, inviting people in. And we want them to share what we're looking to do to, talk to their young men and women in their lives and explain, what's appropriate and what isn't and what needs to be done and how we can, get through this as a city, because, we will have a verdict. And we don't know, we're looking at it from a one case perspective. There's all kinds of things that could trigger a response in our city. And I think that the more work we do connecting with our communities, working with our communities, and building equity in those communities will serve us when that event happens.
I think I'm asking outside of what we normally do, and I agree. There are certain district captains, ones that I work with here in my district, that are involved with the community, that are engaging with community. But as we plan for the release of whatever that verdict is going to be, and we, want to sort of think about civil unrest that might happen here, is there some specific thinking in that context about ways that we might engage with community, particularly about how PPD is changing in Philadelphia?
I know it's something we think about. I like to speak with the commissioner and work on what our communication strategy will be. And I know it'll be part of a larger strategy that the city is also developing to, make sure that we, let our folks know, hey, we're trying. We are really trying to, help the community do the right things and commit to this reform, work with us, and not look for a setback when a verdict comes out, regardless of where it goes.
Thank you. I'm hopeful that will be a part of our thinking. I think it's more than just about where we're going to deploy police, right? In preparation for civil unrest. It's about the conversations that we're having with community members that allow them to build different relationships with police too. So, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Gauthier, for your questions, and I'd like to call upon Councilmember Mark Squilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for all these great questions and answers. I just want to piggyback off one of the questions, and I think it's more of the challenges of not only attracting people, but then getting through the process to become police officers. And it seems like the problem always goes into the more of not the testing area, but then the mental health or I'm not sure the proper term to use, but the personal test that they have to go through. And is there any way, there seems to be no way to appeal that. So if somebody gets rejected for that purpose, is there any way for a person to appeal that process?
Well, with regard to mental health, there is a second opportunity for a psych, and then the doctors sit down and talk. And that has been successful in about half of the cases where, one psych doctor may have read it one way, they talk and do something else. With regards to the elimination in a process, there are some things that can't be challenged because they're state rules. And some of those things are selling of drugs or things that have been done in the past that we have no leeway with. Others can be appealed if they felt that they weren't looked at properly, but it's not a vigorous appeal process. They would submit a letter saying how they want it to be appealed. And I know when I sat in the position where the folders would come to me, sometimes we would send them back and say, like, wait a minute, this was a driving record issue 15 years ago. they've since demonstrated that they've grown up. They've done dumb things at 17 years old, but now they're a contributing member of society. Let's give them another look and let them come through. But because of our municipal police officer standing with the state, there are some things, no matter how much somebody has changed or improved, if that's in their record, we are prohibited from hiring them. So, including with areas of mental illness, if somebody had ever been involuntary committed, because there's laws of the state about carrying a gun. So there's things that we don't have discretion over, but I think that we should be very mindful of people have made mistakes, they grow, they've turned things around, and those are folks that would probably make a good cop one day. And I think
I was just going to say that sometimes they can become the better.
Yeah, sometimes that life experience, lets them push somebody in another direction. And I know Deputy Wimberly and her team are very committed to that, to say, like, hey, let's just give these folks a second look. If they've been people who have been historically been washed out of the process, it doesn't mean that they couldn't bring something to our department. And that's what we have a probation period for. If it turns out that we, didn't get it right, there's still that opportunity. But once people get into the academy, we have a very, very, very high success graduation rate. Like, we lose very few people once they enter. The people we lose are in the process.
Right.
And some of it, and I know that our shop has worked really hard by sending people out and engaging them as soon as we got a list, even though we weren't ready for them yet, letting them know what was going to be required for the reading test, the physical fitness, walking them through the process so that way when they show up, they're prepared to pass the test, as opposed to saying, I didn't realize what the run entailed. I didn't know that I had to do sit-ups. I didn't know this other piece of it, to get them, passing on the way in and therefore being able to start sooner.
All right, I want to switch gears real quick, and I know you're maybe familiar, maybe not familiar with the public safety officers that was passed in council last year. There was money in the budget the previous year for that, and hopefully this year be the chance for them. We often hear about issues with police officers having to do things that really don't pertain to their profession. If we have these as people to assist, is it something that you feel that can be deployed or partnered with from the police department to these public safety officers?
I think with the right training and skill set, yes, I do. I think what we always run into is union and contract issues with an unfair labor practice if it's perceived that they're doing police officers' work. If they're doing work that's not traditionally done by police, and some of it has been done by police by default, that there wasn't somebody else left to do that. But I think, I know that it was put on hold during the pandemic. I'm not sure where that lies with being moved forward, but I know it was passed.
I know I'm going to be pushing to try to see how we could mitigate this issue and concern, because we know there's things that we give the police to do, from L&I issuances to other things that you have to get called up for, that maybe it's something that some of these folks could do, like whether it's a traffic accident that came up on the spot and needed somebody there real quickly, or whether it's trash citations that police officers do issue them, but I would bet maybe once a year that they don't have time to do that stuff. So, these things can be very helpful, especially on the quality of life issues in the city of Philadelphia, and lead the police to do the more things as we looking for reform and looking as to consolidate the police department in a way that gives them the ability to do the job that they were hired to do. Then I think it'll free you guys up and hopefully have these other people do in a way that the quality of life issues can be addressed by these type of folks. So I just wanted to bring that up. I know it's probably going to be a sore subject moving forward, but I just think it's something we need to continue to look at, and maybe it can help moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Squilla. Any other questions, Councilmember?
No, that's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I just have a one last wrap-up type question. The purpose of today's hearing was to kind of give an overview of the performance in relationship to the budget. And our goal was to review performance measures, targets, and actuals from the last 5 years and discuss the departmental approaches to budget management and performance improvement. So I've noticed some of the targets across the board, not just in the police department, have been moved down from 80% to 60%. But if the overall performance of the police department is 42%, is the issue that our targets are too high, or is it the issue that our performance needs to improve?
I think it's probably a little of both, sir. I think that we do pick stretch goals because we would like to, no level of violence is acceptable. So you're always trying to get to a goal. And, we also always need to do better, and we need to do better by strategy. We need to do better by data. And I think that we're working very hard to get there. And, the plan is taking shape. And like I said, if we're experiencing and continue to experience success in Pinpoint, we would like to then continue to expand it, saying that what we're doing, but all of that takes manpower and staffing. Like you to say, well, Pinpoint's working, we should make the whole city Pinpoint, then nothing would get done if everything became that most important area. So I think that, our efforts always have to be there, and we do need to get better. But I also think, I know when goals were selected over the last 6 or 7 years anyway, it was always like, what would we really like to get to? Well, would that be realistic? I'm not so sure. But I think if you set a low goal and you're satisfied with hitting it, that's wrong too. So I think it's finding that balance of what our legitimate goals should be, and then how hard we have to push ourselves to get there.
So shouldn't that be something that the administration addresses immediately? Because right now, saying the police department performed at 42%, that just doesn't sound real well. And I'm not saying you're doing a good job or bad job. Overall, I think the police are doing a relatively very good job. But to say 42%, we have a disconnect. So we should figure this out. But if the targets are accurate, then we have to improve our performance. If the targets are unrealistic, we should adjust those to reality. So we have, at least we can perform and show people what the police department's doing. Because right now, if you have unrealistic targets, and you guys, as an example, are doing a very good job, it's not showing on the performance level. This is not a tool that we're really using as administration to measure the performance of departments if we're looking at 42% right now. Okay. Anyway, thank you. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. And on behalf of my colleagues, I want to thank you and the police department for all the work that you do to keep us all safe. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you. I'd like to now call upon our next panel, which I believe is Fire Commissioner Adam Thiel.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner. Please state your name for the record and please proceed.
Good morning, Councilmember Dom and members of City Council. My name is Adam Thiel, and I am the Commissioner for the Philadelphia Fire Department and the Office of Emergency Management Director. I am here today to testify on resolution number 200406, which calls for hearings to discuss the fiscal position and overarching social impact goals of the city, including as related to the 5-year plan and the reporting requirements set forth in the quarterly city manager's report, QCMR, and is submitted to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, or PICA. The quarterly city manager's report for the second quarter of FY21, which ended on 12/31/20, shows the actual PFD spending of $339 million, which exceeds the amount budgeted of $350 million due to PFD support for COVID-related activities and responding to fire and EMS needs arising from the past year's civil unrest. Thank you, and I am happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have a few questions and I'll open it up to my colleagues. And most of my questions are pre-pandemic. So I'm not going to really address what happened during the pandemic because I think it could be really unfair because it's such an unusual situation. So the first question I have is, if we're measuring a department's ability to live within their means, it seems like every year since fiscal year 16, before the pandemic, we've allocated tens of millions of dollars from other parts of the city budget for programs like those that were supposed to be in Parks and Rec and the Free Library to help support our fire department's unbudgeted personnel needs. Every year for the last 6 years, the records show that the department has needed at least $13 million more, some years even more than that, than budgeted to support its operations. My question is really, why doesn't the fire department just ask for more money up front instead of requiring mid-year appropriations from other departments and other city priorities? It's been 6 years like this.
Councilmember, that sounds like a great question for the budget office.
Okay. Is the budget office present today? Oh. Okay. So what you're saying, I think, reading into that, is that you've asked for bigger numbers and the budget office has not provided that?
Councilmember, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the first part of your question, I certainly I can't validate that that's what happened. And secondly, ultimately the budget is prepared by the budget office. So questions about how the budget is prepared and how relative priorities are calibrated are really questions for the budget office.
We'll reach out to them. Thank you. Here's my next question. Given the challenges of running a 24/7, full-time operation with minimum staffing requirements on your engines and ladders, can you tell us how you might adjust your operation to achieve different results? Example, minimum staffing requirements are common in unionized fire departments across the country, yet other cities have been able to minimize overtime expenditures by making adjustments to their operations, whether it's changing response times for less emergency type calls or evaluating risk differently. With the information you know about the types of response required to fire and EMS, are we making headway on reducing these departmental costs?
Councilmember, I think what we're making headway on is providing service and recognizing this is one of the busiest fire departments in the nation, 6th largest city. Every day, 800 to 1,000 emergency incidents. We have more fires, fire deaths, and fire impacts than any other city in the United States, including Chicago, New York, LA. A lot of that's a function of our built environment, as I've discussed before, as well as a lot of the other challenges, a lot of the other factors that are driving many of the other challenges that we have. So our service is fairly simple. I think it's the only service where if you call a telephone number, we head your way immediately with a very limited set of questions. We don't control our work environment. We really don't know what kind of houses we're going into. We really cannot define the behaviors of folks who live in their homes. What we can do is hopefully help provide smoke alarms. And again, I want to encourage everybody to check your smoke alarms. We're looking forward to getting back to some of those proactive programs. But the reality is the equation for us is fairly simple. It's at current service levels. We have to have the minimum staffing, which really, setting aside the union contracts for a minute, our minimum staffing requirements are aligned with the national standards for the built environment in which we operate, everything from buildings from the late 1600s up to the latest and greatest high rises, and of course our iconic row houses, which are particularly challenging from a firefighting standpoint, and we've paid the tragic price for that over the years. So that really is, unless we are somehow directed to change service levels, then we really can't do more with less. We can only do what we're doing with more.
Let me ask you this question then. Are about 70% of your calls SMS calls, not fire service calls?
SMS, EMS?
EMS, rather, yeah, EMS.
It's actually more than that. It's about 80%. Again, that's fairly standard for fire departments that do emergency medical services across the U.S. Not every fire department does. There are many major fire departments that do not do not do EMS at the level at which we do. We have the busiest medic unit in the country for 2 years in a row. In fact, I presented them a plaque yesterday to acknowledge their service. There are 8,760 hours in a year. That medic unit, Medic 8, did 10,000 runs for the past 2 years every year. So that's more than one an hour. And it is simply a matter of our call volume. We don't have control over that. We recognize that we are functioning as the safety net for a lot of folks in the city from a lot of different hazards. And that is a job that we honor and welcome. And it costs money to provide that safety net, however.
Let me ask you another question. On the QCMRs, we went through the last 6 years, and the QCMRs always have an asterisk that says the fire department's performance measures are under review. Some will go back 5 years. I'm just questioning, at what point in time can we expect the asterisks to go away and those reviews be completed?
When our computer-aided dispatch system is more contemporary than a system that was installed in the late 1980s.
If there's an information communication technology problem?
Yes, sir. It's a wonderful thing. Actually, I started in this business 29 years ago. I still know how to use the CAD terminal that's right outside my office because it is so ancient, no longer supported. We are on the track, on path with PPD and the Office of Information Technology to replace that CAD system. As you can imagine, that's a massive investment. So once we start getting quality data, then we'll certainly be able to hopefully do a better job around output measures. Now, I really want to make it clear, outcomes are something else entirely. Because we don't control so many of the variables that affect outcomes from fires and other incidents, it's going to always be a challenge to directly correlate outcomes to our service.
You know how this was measured before you became fire commissioner in prior years? Any idea how this information was measured?
I think it was measured using the data that were available.
So that data is still not available, or it is, but...
Well, the data are available. The challenge is the accuracy, validity, and reliability of the data.
So are you saying that it's tough to do performance measurements in the fire department because we have inaccurate ability to address our data?
Well, I think we're working on it. And again, it's been an initiative since day one for me. That CAD system is hopefully on track to be deployed before too long. We also have an RFP going out for a new records management system. That's another challenge for us. One of the good news things over the past 5 years is we have been able to build an analytics capacity inside the fire department. So we're having more luck, or more, we have more horsepower around using the data we have. The challenge is a lot of our data, and keep in mind 362,000 plus calls for service every year. It's a lot of data. So anything we have to do to parse that, clean it, analyze it is a real challenge from a staffing standpoint.
Are you saying that the data in prior administrations then was inaccurate?
That's not what I'm saying. I wasn't here, Councilman. I'm saying that since I've been here, there have been a lot of questions about the data that have been difficult to answer.
But that would have been the same before too, wasn't it?
Councilman, I wasn't here.
So let me just make sure I'm clear and I understand this, because this is about performance levels and budgeting. In fiscal year 16, the fire department's budget was $219 million. Today it's $315 million. Have your performance numbers increased, or is that not something we can really measure based on the systems we have?
Well, again, I think it depends. For us, the proxy for performance, and it's not a great proxy, but it's the only one we have. The proxy for performance is response time. We know that time and everything we do matters. Fires expand exponentially every minute that they burn from the time of ignition. And of course, we know that brain death occurs 4 to 6 minutes after you start to lose oxygen if you're experiencing a medical emergency. So response time for us is everything, but I guess I would say it's not the only thing. And that's the real challenge for us. And frankly, the challenge for the fire and EMS service as a whole is being able to truly measure outcomes versus inputs and outputs. So I think a lot of our measures here are really, again, we control a small piece of those outcomes, of those measures. So it's kind of a mid-range attempt to do something that's not simply input, output, and moves to outcomes. We're doing a lot of other work with folks like Penn, Drexel, and others to try to actually start to truly measure outcomes. But that also involves a lot of other city agencies. In fact, L&I has a huge role in fire outcomes. The water department has a huge role in fire outcomes. Individual businesses and individual property owners have a huge role in outcomes as well. In fact, one of the principal determinants for whether you live or die in a fire is whether or not you close your door at night. So we would encourage folks to do that as well. That is something that we have absolutely no control over.
Okay, let me, 2 more quick questions for you. And I think my colleagues may have some questions. In the performance area, since fiscal year 16, it looks like the performance targets were about 40% most of the time. So my question to you is similar to what I mentioned earlier. Are targets too high? Is our performance too low? How do we get like a better grade? How do we fix this? Can we improve our performance? Should we adjust our targets? Putting out 40%, I don't think really reflects what I know about the fire department. My personal experiences with the fire department is you guys do a really good job. And I can tell from the situations I've seen. But when you see a 40% level, where are we going wrong here?
So our firefighters and medics do an incredible job. Our dispatchers, fire marshals, everybody, I appreciate that, Councilman. The measures really come out of a national standard. Again, one of the things that council consistently asks us to do, and we're asked to do internally, is benchmark. So if we use our own standard and just make it up, there's no way for us to benchmark. So I think that would be a real challenge. Those national standards are applicable to cities from LA to Philly to New York and everywhere in between. Arguably, if we were going to adjust the standards, we would want a faster response time because our built environment is so interconnected, it's so flammable relative to other cities. When I worked in the Phoenix area, I know you're familiar with that area as well. We don't have wildfires here, but if you go to downtown Phoenix, I defy you to find a row house. I defy you to find any building that was built in the 1850s. Yet here in Philadelphia, we have entire blocks and rows of those buildings. So this is the most extreme firefighting environment in the entire nation. It is also a very challenging environment for emergency medical services. So the way for us to improve performance is to add resources. The way for us to reduce overtime is to add resources. It really is that simple, but I recognize that it is also expensive.
In that area, I asked the Deputy Commissioner of Police the same question I'm going to ask you. Have you utilized virtual recruiting and virtual classes in this environment to try to, I know you have a cadet class. Has that been an option for the fire department?
It's not really an option, although I will say it's not an option for our recruit training, our cadet training. And we did actually finish and then start and finish 2 firefighter EMT recruit academies during the pandemic. That was challenging. The typically 9-month academy became 10 months for one of those classes, but we did get it done. We are certainly looking at other options for providing distance learning, or at least as long as we're going to be under COVID conditions, trying to sort of decompress our academy classes. But right now, we don't see one of those immediately on the horizon. We're hopeful because, of course, every day that we don't have new firefighters and medics out there, we're filling positions on overtime. So what we also did during the pandemic is we launched and completed our second community EMT program in concert with the 1199C organization. And that's part of our attempt, and so far successful, to get folks from our community, from our city, engaged in EMS as a career, whether with us or into healthcare careers elsewhere in the city. So we've had some great success with that. Of course, we just opened 7,800 Ogons initially as a vaccination clinic. We started that the other day. Ultimately, that facility is intended to support our recruitment unit as well as our EMS regional office, so we can expand our Explorers program and do a lot of the other things that we really need to do to make sure that we always have robust pipelines and we can have a diverse and inclusive workforce now and into the future.
And my last question for you. In the last, I guess, since 2016, the budget's grown about $100 million or so. Have we seen an increase in the performance levels from 16 to today?
We are, and it's challenging to have that come out in the performance measures, but we're seeing less multiple alarm fires, so overall less severe fires, which means we're controlling fires while they're smaller because we're getting more resources there. The challenge really is that the EMS service demand continues to rise. Fires are about steady, and we are constantly, remember that if you call 911, the closest unit to you that has emergency medical technicians on board is a fire engine or a ladder truck or one of our squads. So because time matters so much, and you can see in the performance measures, the response time for our ambulances is longer than it is for fire units. Every day, 24/7, 365, hundreds of times a day, we are sending fire apparatus to emergency medical incidents either before or in lieu of ambulances because we need more medics, we need more EMS providers, and we need more ambulances.
I just want to tell you a personal story. It was last week, around 11:30 at night. I was walking my dog, and I witnessed a car accident, a pretty bad one in Center City. And I called 911, and the fire department came out in less than 6 minutes. You guys really responded well. They took her to, the woman who was hit in the front was pregnant. They took her to the hospital. You guys did a really good job. I just wanted to mention that, and I'm going to thank you for your service, Commissioner, and thank all your firefighters involved in protecting us, doing a good job. This goal is to try to improve our performance and show better, for the investments we make, how do we improve our performance? That's what this is about. So thank you very much. I'm going to go to my colleague, Councilmember Maria Canales Sanchez. I know she has a question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner Thiel. We've been having this conversation since you came to the city of Philadelphia. You came in and the fire department was in dire straits, and you've been trying to build that up. Want to speak to what you see as some structural challenges that you have that you're working on that could either, one, be changed through the negotiations with our collective bargaining units, or two, around what are your departmental service requirements from other departments that have limited your capacity to manage some of the things that we're talking about?
Councilmember, I appreciate that, and again, appreciate your support through the years. I vividly remember standing with you at Ladder 15 at the time in Frankfurt, where Engine 14 had been closed. And I remember that when I was down the street from there launching our first community vaccination clinic at the Northeast Baptist Church with Engine 14 and Ladder 15 there in quarters ready to respond. That company has already made multiple rescues since being restored to service back in November, thanks to a federal grant and a fair amount of money from the city. So we actually don't have a lot of issues with our contract with other agencies. I mean, I think the big thing right now, and I understand the chair wants to sort of limit this to non-COVID. I think the big thing for us is that we always respond to our citizens, and we always respond to other city agencies. So right now, what we have going on, we have a fire down at 3rd and Chestnut, which is a challenging location for us. That's one of 3 working fires already today. And we are at vaccination clinics in multiple locations around the city. We're actually shuttling vaccine from place to place. So there are a lot of things that we are doing that folks don't see, assisting other city agencies. We're happy to do that. We don't consider any of those things mandates per se. And of course, we're hopeful that a lot of the COVID missions will actually be ultimately reimbursed by FEMA. So I'm not sure we really have anything that I can point to that's kind of an external factor, pushing us to do things a certain way.
So let's talk about your recruitment and your classes on the HR component, because, part of our challenge is we give the fire department everything they ask us for as related to new recruits, but you can't get new recruits in. So you're telling me there's nothing we could be doing differently to get you those classes in line so that you're better staffed?
Oh, well, yeah, I think we're ready to run a recruiter academy anytime. We have a list. We have our academies ready. So we just need the green light to hire folks.
So,
and that's because we're recruiting constantly. As you know, we've invested more in our recruiting unit in the past 5 years than ever before. Our Explorers program, which I'm really happy to have this dedicated facility. Our Randolph program is really in a great place right now. So we're hoping to get schools back full time so those students can get back into our program. We can get Explorers going. So our recruitment unit's been doing a lot on social media. So we're really trying to keep people engaged. We've been making phone calls to folks on the list, encouraging them to hold on. The real challenge for us, and it's a timely question, our current firefighter EMT list expires in November. We understand there is not an option to extend the list. And so we're working with OHR to understand how we could have an equitable process and still meet if there are COVID restrictions between now and when we need to have a new firefighter EMT list.
So those are the examples that I'm asking for, right? There's some issues that are COVID related, but there's some structural issues that you can't control in terms of getting your folks in. Corporations are onboarding, so we can't use COVID as an excuse for not doing this onboarding. So what is the structural holdup for the department in terms of getting this class in? Is it just finance department approval? Is it HR? What is holding our ability to mount the classes that you are allocated on an annual basis from our budget?
Council member, the answer to your questions are yes.
Okay. So, I think, again, when we're trying to manage the conversation around budgets and challenges, city council has never not given the fire department what it's requested. The issue for us is when we keep seeing the overtime and then we see classes that are planned but not had, then we need to know what is the structural problem. If HR is a problem, what are the options for us to get this going? For us to have an EMS list that expires in November, when you're saying that is the increase in service that you're having, you're doing the best you can with Randolph, 1190C and other programs. What we should be setting up for that second list right now. And if we're not doing that, that means come November, you have no list to work from.
Council member, we are. So to be really clear, I would never characterize OHR as a problem. They've been great.
They have capacity. They have capacity issues.
Right. Everybody has capacity issues. That's
right. But the issue is, if they don't have the capacity and we can't build the capacity, but we still need to get you the list, that's not the only way to get to that. My issue is, when we're in dire situations, what's the alternative plan so that we're not tying your hands? You're coming back and asking us for more overtime, and then we act like we don't know what's going on.
Councilmember, I appreciate that. And I want to highlight something really positive, and council deserves a lot of the credit for this, of course, as well as Mayor Kenny and all of our city partners. Last year, we made a huge change, last fiscal year, which was actually properly putting the proper number of positions in our budget to accurately reflect the number of positions that we need of all types to maintain service 24/7, 365, cover those minimum staffing requirements with a minimal amount of overtime. And that's a big number. Something around 3,400 positions total. Right now, our actual is something around 2,800 positions. So while the positions are there on the books, this is sort of the difference between authorization and appropriation. The positions are there. The funding was never there for all reasons that we understand, because it's going to take a while to build to that. To your point, for us to get to that point, overtime is always going to be part of what we do. That actually is more efficient than we don't want to overstaff. We're looking for this sort of sweet spot where every position is covered at around 120 to 130% to cover scheduled leave and overtime and other reasons that people are out. That's going to take a couple classes a year of 80 to 100 for the next several years to get to that point. And we understand why, certainly with COVID and all of the fiscal stress and all of the uncertainty around what's happening from the federal government, we're hopeful that now some of those uncertainties have been addressed, and we, like others, of course, will be looking forward to the April 15th proposed budget.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have this challenge all the time. People plan for what they get, not for what they need. And then we have the conversation about what the gap is, right? And, we have to get to a place, if the administration wants to prioritize this department because of all the shortcomings prior to this administration, because in essence, you're a perfect example of really filling gaps, a department that did not get all of this resources under the last 8 years, and you're playing catch up. But we need to know what that is. If we don't get 82 officers, this is the impact of the overtime to not filling those slots, right? Because then we make the decisions in the beginning, not want to come back and say the department is not managing their overtime at the end. This is what 82 officers gets us a year over the next 5 years. Otherwise, the overtime continues to be what it is. And I think the numbers will bear out that the initial investment is smarter and wiser for us to do. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. We'll continue to have this conversation and again, strongly advocate we need to plan for what we need. And then if we don't have it, we make adjustments, but it's hard when all we're doing is always filling in gaps. It doesn't seem fair. And again, thank you to your officers. I know Reverend Mason and folks at the Northeast Baptist were very, very happy. Thank you for all your service. I've seen your officers both at the Lyric Corps Center, some of the pop-up locations. I know this is hard work. I know the work that you do in Kensington in particular as we respond to the opioid. I try to stop and always thank someone when I see them, doing the work that they do every single day over there. It is very tasking for them. So we appreciate your service. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez. And now I'd like to call upon Councilmember Kathy Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Commissioner Thiel. I just wanted to also say thank you to you and the department and all of your staff who have been working with the pop-up COVID-19 vaccination sites, and echo the sentiments of my colleague and the district council member, Councilmember Sanchez, around the work that you all have been doing at Northeast Baptist Church. I know that Pastor Mason is so happy to have you all in the community and to continue to be of service to that community. One thing I wanted to ask you was relative to the gun violence crisis that we see in the city and how that's impacting your EMS unit specifically.
Councilmember, I appreciate the question. It actually, it's actually affecting our folks personally as well. One of our EMS captains, actually, his brother was killed a couple weeks ago in a tragic shooting. So, this is something 800 to 1,000 times a day. Our medics, EMTs, firefighter EMTs, our dispatchers are exposed to things that for many folks, it's a once in a lifetime tragic experience. That takes its toll. So, the behavioral health component, making sure that we provide our members what they need. Most of us have PTS at some level. That's fairly well documented in the literature. So we're working constantly with a host of partners, with Local 22, with a lot of other partners on our health plan to make sure that we have this continuum of care, to take care of our folks, because they really are exposed to terrible things, including the effects of gun violence. One of the things that's a little bit different here in Philadelphia, as you know, the police department does a lot of the transport for patients who experience penetrating trauma. So that's something we do side by side with PPD. We're frequently there. They're often and again, the medical literature has borne out that's actually something that another thing that PPD does very well in service to our community. And we frequently transport police officers who've been wounded in the line of duty or injured in other ways. So it's a challenge for our members to be exposed to that, and it's certainly something that we feel like we all have a role in. I like to think that our youth programs, of course, I'm on the PAL board as well, Boys and Girls Clubs. I like to think that our youth programs, our pipeline programs, are also helping in terms of the gun violence pandemic, because, anything, our Randolph program, I just hope that that's helping in some way. The example that our members are setting, a lot of the things. One of our firehouses did a local town hall on gun violence in North Philly, just because they felt like we want to be part of the solution for everything. So we hope that some of the things we're doing are at least helping our sisters and brothers in blue and all of the other folks in the city government, the non-uniform folks who are working on violence prevention. Because it really is something, we all need to have a role in and sort of own.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. And I wanted to ask you a few questions that I also asked the police department around the percentage of your budget. What percentage of your budget accounts for Class 100?
91%.
Pardon me, you said 90?
91%.
91%. Okay, so the other 9% of your budget is mixed in between Class 200 and 500.
We have money in pretty much every category, but it's all sort of small potatoes when you're talking about the bulk of our budget, which goes towards salaries for our frontline firefighters, medics, dispatchers, fire marshals, support staff.
Sure, and then also relative to your last recruiting classes, around the demographics of your last recruiting classes.
I don't have that at hand, but we've been doing a lot of work on recruitment and actually a lot of work with OHR to change our testing processes. When I got here, the performance on the prior list was frankly abysmal. So we looked at the entire process. We made some changes, put out an RFP for different testing instruments, and our demographics have really gotten a lot better. But they need to get, it's never something that we can stop doing. we still need to continue to work constantly on building a diverse workforce in every way that you can think of.
Excellent. And I just wanted to highlight that work and the change in the recruiting practices. It is apparent. I've seen individuals that I went to college with at Westchester and at Cheney University who were a part of the last class. So I want to thank you all for that work. That will conclude my line of questioning on recruitment and staffing, but I wanted to ask a question about the Explorers program as well.
Great. It's one of my favorites.
Me too. So specifically around workforce development and the Explorers program, earlier in the hearing, the police department and our deputy commissioner talked about thinking about ways that we could potentially provide an exemption to young people who come through the Explorers program for employment with the said department. In your instance, it would be the fire department. What current preference is available for young people who go through the Explorers program, and what's the status of the program now, after COVID?
Well, the points allocation, that's really something that is done, those are done by the Civil Service Commission and promulgated by by OHR. So I know those are always in flux, so I would hesitate to talk about that now because I'm not sure what the Civil Service Commission is considering for the next list. We, of course, would love to have a more direct pathway for Explorers, for our Randolph Skills Academy graduates, for our community EMT graduates, and we are having those kinds of conversations with the Commission and with OHR that executes the kind of the will of the Commission. So we've been having those conversations. Ultimately, those decisions are not ours. What we are really trying to do, and I mentioned the facility at 7800 Ogons that we're looking forward to moving our Explorers into when we get kind of on the other side of COVID. I want to acknowledge Councilmember Parker, who was kind of with us 2 years ago when we kind of had this vision. And frankly, the vision came from, we had, I think, I don't quote me on the exact numbers, but I think we had 200 young people raised their hand to be part of the Explorers, and we could only accommodate 100 of them because we just didn't have the physical space to do that. Frankly, it brought me to tears. And on that day, we looked to find a way that we could create a permanent home for our Explorers in a place that was accessible. We found this spot in this historic church that we're leasing the building from. We had a couple other organizational units that we're out of space that we need to put there as well. And I want to acknowledge, Councilmember Quinones Sanchez as well. She's been a supporter in us with the Randolph program and also moving resources into recruitment since day one. So it's really kind of on the verge of paying off. The community EMT programs have been successful beyond my wildest dreams. And even with COVID, we've been able to do those. So really, we need more folks to get vaccinated. We need people to wear their masks. And we're hopeful that if we can get to the point where we can go at least even back to semi-normal, we really want to not just reinvigorate, but expand our Explorers program. It's a huge piece of what we need to do. And we're also, I think the recent changes around residency are going to be a game changer for us. At least I'm hopeful that they're a game changer for us as well, in a positive way.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson. And one last question, Commissioner. Do you know if the Class 100, $289 million for fiscal year 21, does that include fringe benefits, health insurance, pension costs, et cetera?
Councilmember, that is also a question for the budget office. It is my understanding that all or some of the fringe benefits are carried elsewhere in the city's budget. And I know that simply because as we try to do benchmarking comparisons with other jurisdictions, and having worked in many other jurisdictions, they all sort of carry those in a different place, and it can make it very difficult to do an apples to apples comparison.
I remember our finance director a few years ago saying to me that they normally are not in the budget, and they cost the city, when he came in for an appropriation, it cost the city, I think it was 88 cents for every dollar of labor was for fringe benefits, including pensions and so forth, and pension liabilities. So I guess that's what brings these 5 departments we're speaking to today to 50% of our overall spending budget. And that's why I think it's important that we look at the performance of all these departments. Anyway, I want to thank you again, Commissioner. I want to thank your department for the tremendous service. We feel very confident and safe in your hands, so keep up the good work. And we appreciate you being here today. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. And now we'd like to call upon our next panel, which is the Commissioner, Department of Prisons. I believe it's Blanche Carney.
Good morning, Council Member Dom and members of City Council. My name is Blanche Carney, and I am the Philadelphia Department of Prisons Commissioner. I'm here today to testify on resolution number 2004006, which calls for hearings to discuss the fiscal position and overarching social impact goals of the city, including and as related to the 5-year plan and the reporting requirements set forth in the quarterly city manager's report, known as QCMR, and submitted to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, also known as PICA. The quarterly city manager's report for the second quarter of fiscal year 21, which ended on 12/31/20, shows the actual PDP spending is $220 million, which is approximately what was budgeted. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thanks for being here. And thank you to your department for all their work and great effort. I have 3 or 4 quick questions for you. The current prison count as we sit here today, can you give us that number?
The current, excuse me, I'm sorry. It's 4775.
I don't remember exactly when, but I remember it being closer to 4,000 a year ago or 2 years ago. Is that pretty accurate?
That is pretty accurate. The average, average population in fiscal year 19 was 4817, and for fiscal year 20 was 4575.
And has there been any, over the last 12 months, any reason for an increase in the population? Because I remember getting down to close to 4,000. What's been the reason for the increase? Is it courts that have been closed, or what's been the reason?
It's a combination. We're averaging approximately 215 new admissions per week. The admissions are outpacing releases, and with the courts reopening, that has had an impact on the processing and disposition of cases.
So, here's my question. Like other departments, the prison's budget seems really dependent on its last 200 budget. And in recent years, this is good news, you've managed to get the contracted services budget down from 75% personnel budget to about 66%. How are you working to make sure that number doesn't creep up again and daily census stays at its current elevated level or grows even more? How are we working to manage that current level?
Councilman Dom, we're working, we just stood up a court for municipal court hearings at the detention center that went into effect on the 29th. And we're hoping with the opening of that court on our campus, we'll be able to have cases heard and a disposition made and release people accordingly if that is in fact a disposition. We've also been managing our contracted services to do a deeper dive into the required care, providing more robust services as an intervention and thus decreasing those services as needed. However, with the increase in the population, we will experience some slight increase costs with food and medical, because we are getting folks in that have chronic health conditions, COVID related. And we also, the increase in inmates will slightly increase our food contract as well.
Is there any opportunity for your department, because of the COVID situation with courts being closed and all the COVID related issues, is there an opportunity for any federal reimbursements in those areas?
Yes, we are working with the Recovery Office to fund the COVID initiatives. So we're looking to get some reimbursements, but we've been working vigorously with the Recovery Office to cover some of our mitigation strategies related to COVID.
And I guess my other question though was, is there an opportunity, because you probably have people at the prison longer than normal because the courts were closed, is there a way of calculating the extra days they're there and asking for that reimbursement from the federal government?
We can certainly explore that. We had not done that, but we can explore that.
And that should be reimbursable because that was caused by COVID, not by anything else.
Exactly, and it's increased the average length of stay.
Yeah, let's try to. I would love to see us get some of that money back because those are big costs. Last question, then I'll turn it over to my colleague. What utility do we get by measuring something like processing housing time that never changes? Is there something else we should be looking at or holding the prisons accountable for going forward? And in your opinion, what are the 3 or 4 most important areas we should measure the prison's success with?
I believe that the housing of the population is critical because we're receiving people into our operations. We're processing them within 4 hours. It's critical. We want to make sure that they're properly housed and classified and placed in the cell. I think that's a measure that we should continue to monitor because even with the COVID and the increased admissions, we want to make sure that we're not leaving people in the receiving room longer than necessary. I also think we should continue to monitor and assess our performance with assessments for behavioral health needs and having people properly assessed to receive their right medication and diagnosis. The same thing, we should monitor our response for chronic care and any medical conditions unknown to the individuals coming in, whether it's known or unknown. And we should monitor and measure how quickly they're being assessed and treated, for the good of the entire population and the staff that are here to provide security.
One last question. Right now, what is our recidivism rate currently?
Right now, excuse me 1 minute. The first year recidivism rate, the target was at 20%. The actual is 73.5. And so we know that people are coming in, but that could be based on, for that first year, the court being closed and the hearing and disposition of cases. So I really wouldn't want to just have a blanket statement for that. There may be some variables, and we know increased length of stay, people come, and then the cases are being scheduled now to be heard.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner. I'm going to ask my colleague, Councilmember Kathy Gilmore-Richardson, who has some questions. So I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Commissioner Carney. I wanted to start with one of the responses you gave to my colleague, Councilmember Dom, regarding some of the individuals who receive or need to receive mental health or drug and alcohol treatment. How has that been going during COVID, and how has that impacted your budget?
So we have continued uninterrupted to provide MAT and substance abuse treatment, COVID-related treatment as well, and placing folks where they need to be once they're assessed if they're determined to be positive. But it has increased our costs because we've implemented several mitigation strategies, from testing the entire population twice to see what the infection rate was, as well as the one-time universal testing of staff. We also have in-person screeners for the staff or any legal visitor who comes on campus. And part of the increase in funding for those operations were staffing. You needed to have the appropriate nursing and medical staff to administer the testing of the staff and the population. Also, we are in the process, about a month in now, of our vaccination program. So we are offering the vaccine to the staff and the inmate population, and we're vaccinating those who are receptive to receiving the vaccine.
Okay, thank you for that. And I also wanted to go back to some questions that I have for both of the other departments we've heard from so far this morning. What percentage of your budget is Class 100?
The percentage of Class 100 is 56.3%.
Okay, so 56.3% of your budget is around staffing and salary benefits, and that includes overtime?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask about your next class. When are you bringing on your next class of correctional officers?
So we currently have a class in the academy, and we brought them on board at that class February the 22nd, and they're scheduled for graduation May 5th. We completed our second engagement. We had 2 orientations, one on March 6th and one on March 13th, and that yielded 84 candidates who expressed interest in the position. And of those candidates, we were able to complete the 66 first interviews, and 22 are now scheduled for their second interviews, with additional interviews being scheduled.
Okay, great. So your class 100 is 56.3% of your budget, and contract services account for how much?
40.2%.
Okay. 40.2%. Okay. So if you could, for the benefit, I know for myself, it would be helpful to understand what is your current staff complement?
Our current staff complement is 1863. The budgeted position is 2006. So we've experienced attrition of staff.
Okay. Okay. So budgeted for 2060, currently at 1,863.
Yes.
Okay. So, okay. Okay. And I don't know if you'll be able to respond to this question similarly based on the response from the Deputy Commissioner of the Police Department. Out of the 1,863, what is your current census on a day-to-day basis, meaning your staffing and attendance on a daily basis? Or is that something that we would need to discuss in executive committee?
Partially discussed in executive committee. However, we are scheduling staff throughout the facilities to fill the various posts, and then that's realized based on the number who report for duty. But we can certainly take a deeper dive. But we are staffing, but it's based on who's actually reporting for duty.
Okay, so. Okay, I just want to drill down on this, Mr. Chair, for one moment, if you don't mind. So would you say, based on the attrition we talked about, and I'm just breaking things down from the different classes, and then how much of that accounts for your budget, and then looking at your actual numbers of employees, would you say your issue from a staffing and budgeting perspective is staffing, or is it attendance?
It's attendance. We believe we're properly staffed, even with the attrition and the onboarding of classes. We believe we are properly staffed. However, it's the attendance of staff reporting for duty. So we complete our rosters across the facilities, but it is the based on the staff attendance.
Okay. I'll circle back there, Mr. Chair. Because I was just trying to ask the same questions of each department, but the numbers here are not adding up for me. So we'll definitely circle back there. Lastly, I wanted to know for your last 5 classes, same question for all the departments, last 5 classes of new correctional officers, if you have the demographics for those classes.
I do not have the demographics for the last 5 classes. I have the overall demographics, but I do not have it. I can get that information for you.
Okay, that'll be helpful. And then, pardon me, Mr. Chair, one more question I have for preparation around your FY22 budget. What type of investments are you all making around any realignment around educational support for individuals to help reduce the amount of recidivism that we're seeing and providing some of the inmates with opportunities for when they're released? Are there any specific investments in your FY22 budget to deal with some of the recidivism issues?
Our partnership with the Office of Reentry Partnerships, we do fund a few of the initiatives that are provided through that office, and we'll continue to fund those initiatives because they directly benefit people with the pre-engagement and then post-release engagement by that office. So we'll continue to fund those initiatives out of the Office of Reentry Partnerships.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Council Member. Thank you very much. I just have a few other questions, Commissioner. I was looking, we had already the police department, the fire department, now we're at prisons. When you look over it from 2016 to today, the police department's labor, class 100 went up 80 million, class 200 went up a little, not much. Fire department, class 100 since 16 went up 100 million. The class 200 also went up very little. But I will say this, and I was really very vocal back in 16 and 17 with the prison department. Yours have gone down. So I think we owe you gratitude, and I appreciate that you've reduced it. I'm going to give the example. Class 116 was 133 million. Today it's 126.5 million. But the big difference is class 200, which went from 105 million to 88 million. So thank you for that. That's really good. And I guess you can't stop me from asking this question, but what else could we be doing to even reduce it further?
We'll continue to explore any new practices as far as the delivery of services. We have had an increase in telemedicine and telehealth during the pandemic. We positioned ourselves to increase that capacity. So I think that's an opportunity we can expand post-COVID. So telehealth has really been meaningful to us. So I think that's an avenue we can explore, and I think we can realize some additional savings.
And what I like to do offline, not during this hearing, is maybe have a separate conversation with you and my colleagues on what we can do as a city to really prevent people from returning once they leave the prison, and equipping them with financial literacy courses, which we did pre-COVID, and other skill sets to really help them get back into our society and economy and be very productive and have a great life after they left the prison. So I'd like to set that up after this, but that should be a big focus for us because that's really key.
Yes. And Councilman Dom, if I may, I'd like to thank you publicly. I know I sent a letter. You donated $10,000 to the prisons for the inmates for their virtual call time, and I appreciate that and wanted to officially acknowledge it on this call.
Well, I appreciate that. I could never see having to pay to call my mother, and that's why I did that. I think that was right. So anyway, thank you very much, and thank you for the good work. Keep it up. And we appreciate you. Thank you very much to you and your department, Commissioner. Thanks for being here.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to echo the sentiments of Commissioner Carney and saying thank you for that donation. And I'm sure that was helpful for so many families, particularly during this time. So I wanted to say thank you for that. And to Commissioner Carney, wanted to thank you for that $17 million reduction in Class 200 funds. I think that is phenomenal. It's something we don't see very often, but you have worked very, very hard to ensure that your department is taking a close look at your contractual services. So I just wanted to thank you for your work and for all that you're doing.
Thank you.
Councilor, thank you, Commissioner, for being here. And thank you again for all you and your department for this great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So now we'd like to call our next panel, which is Deputy Managing Director for Streets, Christopher Newman. Is Mr. Newman here today?
I'm sorry, Council.
Okay. Mr. Newman, if you could state your name and proceed with your testimony.
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, Councilman Dom and members of City Council. My name is Christopher Newman, Deputy Commissioner for Administration for the Philadelphia Streets Department. I am here today to testify on resolution number 24406, which calls for hearings to discuss the fiscal position and overarching social impact goals of the city, including and as related to the 5-year plan and the reporting requirements set forth in the quarterly city manager's report and as submitted to PICA. The quarterly city manager's report for the second quarter of FY21, which ended on 12/31/20, shows the actual street spend is projected to be $162 million, which slightly exceeds the original budget amount of $153 million. This is largely due to an increase over the original budget for waste disposal fees. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and thank you to your department, especially during this COVID period. It has not been easy, I'm sure, to deal with what's been going on with trash and collection and how much more trash is in residential areas versus in office buildings that were closed. So thank you to you and your department.
Thank you.
No, it's a fact. I just want to go over some basic questions with you. And the first one is, since fiscal year 16, it seems that the streets department has achieved its performance targets about 32% of the time. Meanwhile, the budget has grown 22%, not including this last increase you just mentioned, over the same period. How does the budget relate to your department's performance?
Well, if you look at the over that 6-year period, Councilman Don, we've actually been hit with a lot of different challenges over that period of time. It's just been sort of one thing after the other. So in FY16 and FY17, if you recall, we were dealing with what we called the compactor crisis at that time, where we simply didn't have enough compactors to staff our operations for sanitation because we were holding back our workforce because there was no compactors. And that ultimately impacted our on-time performance and other factors that related to sanitation. As we moved out of that, and we did eventually largely get out of that by virtue of a capital line item that allowed us to purchase 35 compactors each year, we started having significant attendance issues, particularly pattern attendance issues as we went into FY19, FY20, even FY18. And that impacted us again, mostly in the sanitation area. This year, and you mentioned it earlier, our big concern and our big critical situation is the COVID impact and how it's related to trash. So just to kind of give you a scale of what's happened this year, our trash on a almost week-to-week basis is 30% higher than it was the previous fiscal year. Now that we're in March, we're actually in a period of time where we're hitting we have the same kind of trash problem that we had last March. So we're kind of comparing it to prior fiscal years. And where we're at now is about 27%. So it hasn't really gone down a whole lot. The combination of those things just occurring year to year has made it hard for us to make assumptions to really target our measures the right way. And I think we just have to do a better job projecting what our issues are on a year to year basis and making those targets a little bit more accurate.
I mean, because if you're at 32%, the question I've asked the other departments is either the targets are too high, and I know we keep moving the targets down, or performance is too low. And I don't have the answer. I'm just putting it out there that that's really the issue.
Yeah. And from our perspective, it's the targets are too high, but you have to, what we do is we look at what should be happening, right? So in a perfect world, if our attendance was what it should be, what should our targets be at that point? And I think we have to do a better job kind of assuming what the reality is and making our targets based on what the realities of the conditions are.
Now, you mentioned in the budget that I think you're up about $9 million or $10 million from what you budgeted for the fiscal year.
Yes, and that's almost all what we had to do for waste disposal cost. So because we have more trash in the street, we project that our tonnage levels are going to go up about 108,000 tons this year. And all that relates to what we have to do to dispose of that trash. So that amount of money is about the same amount that we're asking for our increase.
And so would that be covered? Is that mostly COVID related, right? Would the federal dollars help us in that regard? Could we apply for federal dollars? Because this was a COVID related issue, whether it's the trash pickup or it's the dumping or whatever it is, it's COVID related. And can we get federal dollars for that?
We submitted the information that was requested by the Recovery Office to get that reimbursement. We're hoping that happens. My understanding is that reimbursement for things like increased trash tonnage is a hard sell based on the grant requirements, but we're hoping that happens.
That did occur because people weren't in office buildings and they were home because of COVID, and all those related costs are because of what happened with the pandemic.
That's correct. And it hit us particularly hard because what we do is residential trash. As you know, we don't even take care of commercial trash. So places like New York that do both residential and commercial, in some cases it was balanced out because no businesses were generating trash. Whereas us, it's all residential. So it all accumulated for us. And that's why we're dealing with what we're dealing with now.
Seems to me we should argue very strongly for that reimbursement.
Yes. And we're trying. We're trying to.
Recycling, this question's around recycling. What's the plan for recycling going forward? You know, we weren't the only city that was impacted by the losses in the China recycling market. So what are we doing to sell this as a commodity in the market today?
That's a good question. What I can tell you is we actually are trending down on our costs for recycling. So we started the fiscal year at $104 a ton. We're now down to $90 a ton. We're hoping that gets better as time goes on and the commodities become more sellable. I can't really tell you from a strategic level what we're doing to help those commodities become more marketable and more sellable. We're trying on our end just to kind of maintain the budgeted cost so that it doesn't hurt our budget. The fact that is a problem right now. If you look at how many tons of recycling we've actually processed on a year-to-year basis since 2016, it has actually gone down, and it's because of that global recycling problem, in part.
We have someone who's helping us in this area as far as selling this commodity in the market.
We have one individual that works on coming up with strategies to increase our recycling processing tons. Yes.
I only bring it up because it might be in our interest to find out what every other city's doing and find out best practices so we can maximize that value.
Well, I mean, from an internal point of view, what we're doing is we're trying to increase the amount of recycling that's actually being put out into the street, right? So, from an educational point of view, trying to educate our residents what type of recycling they should put out in the recycling buckets, how important it is for it to be dry, because if it's not, it becomes contaminated. We have to throw it into the trash. So I guess from an internal perspective, it's really about making sure the residents know what they need to do and making sure they put as much recycling in the recycling buckets as possible. But beyond that, in terms of the commodities, which I think was your original question, there's really nothing we can do.
Would it be beneficial for us to in other cities utilize a commodities broker to assist us in maximizing this value?
I can look into that.
Yeah, well, let's look into it. No, I think it might be a good idea for us. Last question for me, at least for now. Our trash collection process hasn't really changed that dramatically in the last few decades. I think what I mostly see is typically 3 people on a backloading trash truck. And I'm questioning, what are other cities doing? What technologies can we evaluate to become more efficient and effective? And how are we looking forward in this moment, maybe to invest in these new ideas around sanitation, recycling, and composting, especially over the next 5 years? How can we use technology to our advantage, improve service, and cut our overhead?
We're actually moving forward with, from a strategic point of view, actually using technology a lot for our sanitation operations, as well as for various transportation operations. And I think you're aware of it, that we have installed GPS devices in all of our trucks. And from those devices, we're actually tracking what's going on in real time in the streets. It's generating a lot of data. So what we want to do is we want to take an objective data approach from a performance and productivity perspective, see what really we should be doing to increase efficiency, what's working and what's not working, and implement changes based on that. Now, things that we have looked at in the past, and this might be related to why you originally asked the question, so for example, not using 3 people and using a truck where a lever arm actually collects the trash. We did look into that. The problem for Philadelphia is we have so many smaller streets that we can't collect the trash that way. And if we did do that, it actually makes our operation slower and takes us a longer period of time to collect the trash. So what we're focused on is using that technology to see what type of operational changes we can make to make our process more efficient. And it's already actually provided benefits because we're using this for snow ops, we're using it for paving, we're using it for street cleaning. If you think about, and this is just my opinion, but hopefully you guys agree, we did a really great job with snow ops this year. And a lot of that is attributed to the fact that we were able to track what was going on in real time out in the streets and make the changes we needed to do during those winter events.
Thank you. I'm going to go to my colleague now. Thank you very much. Councilmember Kathy.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And you already asked 2 of my questions around recycling. So I wanted to circle back to that because, again, I think it's this whole conversation around metrics and goals. The increase in trash has caused recycling collection to drop, is it 51.4% in the last quarter from the previous year?
It's about half. Yep.
Okay, and the QCMR highlighted that recycling has been collected with regular trash just due to the sheer volume of residential trash, as you stated, just the volume that we've seen over the duration of the pandemic. But also the QCMR reported that recycling has been collected on time, 98% in the last quarter. So I was just wondering how you all came up with this number when the recycling collection rate has dropped to 7% in the previous quarter. And the trash collection on time rate for the last quarter was 81%, meaning just trying to make the numbers make sense for our realities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think the answer to that, there was a lot of getting mixed trash and mixed recycling. So the recycling was going into the trash stream, which that measure would have been reported under the trash collections. And to the extent that there was recycling collections being done, those collections were on time, 98%.
Got it. Okay, so what solutions or options are you all looking at to try to boost recycling and ensure that the way we recycle and dispose of our trash is more sustainable and environmentally friendly?
Okay, so in terms of collections, we're there now from getting more temporary workers, and I don't want to say that our tonnage levels are going down significantly, but they've at least stabilized. We've been able to keep up with recycling more than we were before. And going back to what I said originally to Councilman Dom, what we're trying to do from an educational perspective is educate our residents on how to increase the amount of recycling in the recycling stream so that we can get more of that tonnage out of what's actually going on in the market. It's not just the global market conditions that have impacted us, it's actually the commodities themselves. So, for example, in FY16, we used to get a lot of newspapers, right? Or prior to FY16, we used to get a lot. That was about 40% of of our recycling processing tons. That's almost zero now. It's down significantly. Even if you look at milk cartons, the plastic milk cartons, the thickness of those milk cartons have gone down. The thickness of cereal boxes for the cardboard have gone down. And combined with that and the global market conditions, it's really impacted how much we can actually generate for recycling. So the focus has been primarily on just generating more by educating residents to put more in. And we're looking from an objective perspective, what neighborhoods are doing a better job, what neighborhoods are doing a worse job, and trying to focus on those communities that really need the education.
Sure. So just to circle back to that, because I know I have a few constituents who reach out to me all the time about recycling. We have one of our friends up in Roxborough who reaches out to us a lot about recycling. So one thing we heard was the communication around when everything will be collected together because of, any other challenges we may be experiencing, or if there will be any change in the recycling schedule. So how is that information communicated so that we can get that information back to our constituents? Because like I said, we have one constituent, she will contact us, on a weekly basis to let us know what happened with her collection for that week. So how do we just communicate that to residents so they're aware of, if there are any changes with recycling collection?
Right. So if we know that there's going to be significant changes from a long-term perspective, we actually send flyers, information to them via the mail. If it's something that's daily happening, which I think is the basis for your question, if we're making decisions on a daily or even a couple day basis, it's usually through social media, and we try to get that information out there as quickly as possible.
Okay, and then quickly, I wanted to talk about the budget to repair potholes. That's always a thing in Philadelphia, and how we're working to improve our road conditions for the streets that we are responsible for. But in your FY21 budget, the budget to repair potholes and improve our road conditions was cut. But recently, Mayor Kinney said that repairing roads was one of the areas in our new budget that would see an increased investment in the next fiscal year. So I just wanted to know, have you all had those discussions with the administration, particularly with the mayor and with finance, to determine how much would be needed to repair the conditions of our roads here in Philadelphia?
Yes, we've had conversations with them. Is your question specific to potholes, or is it just roadway conditions in general?
It's potholes and roadway conditions. I mean, I know we send your office a lot of pothole complaints, and I want to say thank you on the record. Let me get this on the record. Thank you to Commissioner Williams and to Deputy Commissioner Warren, who are on the receiving end of most of those requests that I know we send over to your office. And that's from the pothole repair, street conditions, to trash collection, questions about recycling, short dumping requests, which I think have gone up significantly over the duration of this pandemic. And even when I'm just out and about in the community and I'm seeing things and I'm emailing them directly from my phone, I want to put that on the record and say thank you for being responsive to the needs of our constituents each and every time that we call and verify that it's been completed. But specifically for the question to you, it's around road conditions and pothole repair in the budget there in preparation for FY22.
Right. So if you look at roadway and potholes specifically, one of the reasons why there's so many potholes is because of the quality of the roadways. We have to keep up with about 131 miles of resurfacing in order to keep our roads in good condition. If we can't do that, our roadways deteriorate. So if you look at years ago, prior to FY16, for example, we had about 12,000 potholes that we would take care of, that we would repair. Now, on a good year, we'll have 30-some thousand. If it's a hard winter, we'll have 60,000 to 70,000, right? And we've been trying to, and the administration has really focused on, from a proactive standpoint, giving us the resources that we need to keep up with the resurfacing mileage. And we were doing that for a period of time. One of our newer challenges right now is that we have been required to maintain more ADA ramps, which are very, very costly. They're about $8,000 to restore a ramp for each ramp. And the requirement we have right now is we have to restore each ramp that touches any resurfacing that we do. What that's going to do is that's going to actually take our budget for resurfacing. About 75% of our costs are going to go towards ADA ramps now. So our resurfacing mileage is going to go down significantly. That means what we need is more resources, more funding on the reactive side, on the repair side, in order to repair conditions as they occur. So as more potholes happen, we'll just need more resources in regard to reactively trying to take care of roadway defects as they occur out there.
Okay, that was very, very helpful for me. And I wanted to put on the record again around how you all are ensuring that you're able to be reimbursed for some of the costs that you have incurred as a result of COVID. And one thing I have to say and put on the record, because I went out with some of our sanitation workers, very hardworking sanitation workers, at the onset of the pandemic last year. I didn't put any pictures on social media. I didn't share, but we were out together down in Kensington. And I was with them for 3 hours. And what I saw was just heart-wrenching. Some of the conditions that they were under. And this was like last June or so. So it was really at the onset of the pandemic. My concern from a budgetary perspective is that some of those workers were required to work, 6 days straight, 7 days straight, and they only received 3 shirts and 1 boot voucher. So I know I've been talking about this for a year, but I wanted to drill down on this around budgetary costs. For ensuring that we can provide all workers 5 shirts and 2 boot vouchers a year. I remember them talking about just how arduous it is to walk in some of the roadway conditions that they have to walk in order to collect trash, both at residential properties, but also at some of the short dumping sites that were pervasive in this particular area. So from a budgetary perspective in preparation for FY22, how are you all changing what we're offering to the workers to ensure that, they at least have something to say, we appreciate the work that you're doing. We know it's been arduous, particularly this year, but what are we doing to meet them as far as having the 2 boot vouchers and additional shirts because of the length of time they have to work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, first, let me just say that the streets team agrees with everything you said in terms of the conditions that they work on. They're among the hardest working, if not the hardest working city employees that we have. When we had the trash crisis, for example, a number of us volunteered to actually throw trash just to get the trash done. And it killed us,
Oh, yeah. It's backbreaking work. You are sore. Yes.
Yeah. And I know the commissioner himself actually was throwing trash, so yeah. We are very aware of the conditions that they work on. Unfortunately, I didn't look into your specific issue before this hearing, but I can look into it and get back to you. I know that we've talked about how we can better resource them previously from a budgetary perspective. So I'll talk to our deputy for sanitation and we can get back to you on that question.
That'll be great. I look forward to receiving that information because that is very important to me after walking with them for 3 hours, okay, in the heat, under the conditions that they were under at the onset of the pandemic. It's important to me that the workers receive another boot voucher and receive 2 additional shirts. That is the very least, in my opinion, the least of what we could do for the workers who have been working elongated schedules, as you all have been staffing up with the temporary workers and doing what you can to try to help with the workload they've been experiencing. So that is very important to me. I want to again put that on the record this year and look at our budget in a way that is advantageous to the work they do. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Mr. Newman.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Great questions. Thank you. Deputy Managing Director, I have one or two last questions.
Sure.
It's $8,000 you mentioned to fix a handicap ramp.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Are you referring to like at a corner of a sidewalk where you see the sidewalk is pitched so a wheelchair could go up?
Yes, there's curb cuts where they actually have to. Yes, the wheelchair can go up, and they typically have some bumps on them as you're going up the increase.
How many days and how many men does it take to do that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
What are the man hours to accomplish that, and how many days is it?
Okay, so those are all contracted costs. We actually use a contracted construction folks that actually do that for us. We don't do that in-house.
And have we negotiated that price to the best possible number? Because it just sounds like high to me, to $8,000. Just sounds high, and I can't imagine it's more than 2 or 3 people one day.
Yeah, and it's funny because when I first went to streets, I had the same position as you do, Councilman. The issue with regard to that is that you'd be surprised at how much actual design work goes into these ramps. They're all actually almost custom designed, so a lot of the cost goes to design itself and not just the actual construction cost to do the work.
But is that the price for replacing existing or putting in new?
It's essentially reconstruction, putting in new.
Okay. And the other question I had, I think, in your class 100, which in the fiscal year 21 budget was, I think, 87 million and change. It's probably going to go a little higher. Mm-hmm. That does not include any health insurance, or fringe benefits, or pension costs. Is that correct?
It does not. No.
All right. Listen, I want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank the department. Appreciate everything they're doing. I know this was a very, very challenging year for the streets department, especially with the trash issues. And I guess one of my goals would try to see us increase the miles resurfaced. I'm concerned about that's going down because of these situations. So we have to try to figure out how to become, I think, more efficient with the resources we have. What this whole hearing is about is how do we get better performance for the dollars we're investing, not necessarily to increase more dollars, but to increase our performance level.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you to your department, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our next panel is Acting Commissioner, Department of Licensing and Inspections, Ralph Petro. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Dom and members of City Council. My name is Ralph DePietro. I'm the Acting Commissioner of the Department of Licenses and Inspection, and I'm here today to testify in resolution number 200406, which calls for hearings to discuss the fiscal position and overarching social impact goals of the city, including and as related to the 5-year plan and the reporting requirements set forth in the quarterly city manager's report, and as submitted to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority. The quarterly city manager's report for the second quarter of FY21, which ended on December 31st, 2020, shows the actual L&I spending is $38 million, which aligns with what was budgeted. Despite the challenges presented by COVID, including moving staff to remote work from home, L&I was able to quickly pivot and meet its budgetary and service goals, thanks in large part to the launch of our online permitting system, which occurred a little over a year ago. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you to your department. And I know L&I has been very active, especially during the pandemic, so we appreciate all your efforts. So I have a few questions for you. How do you keep track of the long-term departmental performance if your measures change regularly? Okay, are you building newer measures on top of the old ones so there's some sense of continuity? For example, like from residential building plans being reviewed within 15 days to median time frame for permit issuance. How can you address that?
Well, typically, much like I think Commissioner Teal may have mentioned, it was largely a matter of the data that we have. One of the things we're looking forward to with our new system is maybe revamping some of that to be much more useful. The information and the data available to us now through the Eclipse collection is far superior than what we've had before. So we've been doing sort of regular checks of, for example, in December, we did a check of new construction permits to see how we're processing those. Those are the most complicated, to see the timeframes that they're taking to process. And one thing that we found is one of the benefits of several of the benefits of Eclipse is 24/7 access. One of the biggest barriers to and one of the things that extends the permitting plan review time is the amount of time it takes for us to get a response to the applicant to gather the information and bring it to us. Now with Eclipse, that's available 24/7, so they can load it up online right away. And we're seeing that that's causing a reduction in the amount of time it's taking. So to sort of answer your question, we've gone through several iterations of tracking, but I think now that we're into Eclipse and we're seeing what's capable, I think we're going to be able to come up with a set of really meaningful numbers that actually show real performance versus what we sort of expect is happening. It certainly has been a challenge with our other systems because they weren't really enterprise-wide. Hanson, our legacy system, was a very good system in many ways, but it certainly didn't have the capacity to collect data and produce reporting that Eclipse has. So we're not quite done. Maybe changing those metrics, but I think what you'll see is what's going forward is going to be much more useful and much more real to the folks that are watching department performance.
I think I noticed in the performance, your goals, you achieved them about 47% of the time, which is actually a little better than some of the other departments. Okay, still not where we want it to be, but it's better. And I guess my question to you, and you don't have to give me an answer today, but I learned a valuable lesson with the legislation that our council put forth on the sidewalk and streeteries. I believe we put in that legislation a 3-day approval to accomplish the goal. And I believe the administration and the departments complied, which was amazing. Okay, that was amazing. But it actually taught me a lesson. And the lesson it taught me was that probably putting in time frames is very important. How does L&I, going forward, to make Philadelphia more competitive and make ourselves even more friendly to residents and businesses, how do we restructure across the board timeframes attached to applications? For example, I want a building permit. This is the time frame, and then you work backwards. If we want to get We want to get it approved in 60 days. These are the steps to get it approved in 60 days. So people know, so we don't have these stories of, it took me 6 months to get through L&I or something. Okay, so we have it time framed out so that we can actually deliver to a potential builder, business person, resident, whatever they're doing. This is your time frame that we can commit to and we have to commit to. Is that feasible to get to that point?
Oh, I think so. And I think one of the keys to doing that, one of the keys to getting there is the technology. Now, we're very happy with what we've rolled out in terms of Eclipse, but there's still some work in order to make it more user-friendly, which we've committed to doing over the next year or so. But I think that's a good place to begin that conversation, because one thing is, as we get to see how our resources are deployed, then you can sort of look and say, maybe we need to put more examiners on these types of applications. Maybe we need to redeploy inspectors to different areas of the city to meet the demand. Again, having good data and beginning with good data is critical to sort of answering those needs. And what I think we found is very much as you're sort of suggesting there, that you can look at that, you can look at your operations, and you can find efficiencies there just by asking the question, why not? Why can't we do this? Now, some of our timeframes, for example, are mandated at the state through the UCC. They sort of mandate 20 days for certain types of applications, 30 for others. And we've sort of exceeded that internally, and staff has really done tremendous work to make sure to meet those goals. But I think there's still more that can be done. And part of that is, as I mentioned earlier, having a system that's available 24/7, having one where it facilitates the communication more quickly. One of the questions we always get, folks are sort of, they want to be able to call the plans examiners, for example, right? Which seems like a very basic thing to do. But if you think about how plans examination works, those folks are sort of sitting at a desk with their plans, and to have them sort of stopping and answering phone calls would be somewhat difficult. It certainly would make the continuity of the plan review process more difficult. So being able to schedule appointments with examiners, being able to do, whether they're virtual, which we've been doing, which the folks in the concourse have been phenomenally successful with, I think is just one of the other ways where we can shave some of that time off. And as you know, that the sooner those projects get built, the sooner they're returning revenues to the city, and then employing folks. And so it's a win-win. So there's definitely things we can be doing, and I think we're relying very heavily on our technology to sort of tell us where we need to consider adding resources and making improvements.
I just want to share one other comment and with my colleague. I will say this, because I've been around the block for a while. The best answers being more efficient in every department. The best answers in every department to becoming more efficient come from the people who work in the department.
Yep.
They know it best, and they have your answers. And if we go to them, they'll tell you how to make it better. They know it. We don't need to bring in a consultant. The people in your department know exactly how to do it, and they're smart. And they'll share with you, this is how we cut this time down in half. This is how we do this. And I would challenge them and L&I and other departments we've talked to today to come up with those solutions.
Thank you. Excellent advice.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to ask Councilmember Kathy Gilmore Richardson now. I think she has a comment and some questions.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you really for this hearing, because it's important for us to understand the goals and the metrics for every city department to thoroughly on the record review the QCMR and to understand what's happening with our budget on a quarterly basis. So thank you very much for the opportunity to get a lot of this on the record. And I wanted to personally thank our Acting Commissioner, Ralph DiPietro. You have just been stellar to work with. I'll be honest that, I was very nervous when our former commissioner decided to go, because we leaned on him so very much. And I remember emailing him and saying, no, he can't go. So I wanted to thank you for joining us on the community walkthrough, for always being so responsive to the very complicated constituent cases that we have and that my office receives, and for always getting back to us in a very timely fashion. I wanted to quickly go through through a few questions I had around your budget, specifically around what percentage of your budget is Class 100 funds. I want to get that on the record. And then two, your budget for demolitions of unsafe buildings was drastically cut in fiscal year 21, and that was due to the budget cuts made to, almost every department and office in the city. A lot of those properties are not only unsafe for neighborhoods, but they continue to contribute to the blight and the crime that we're seeing in certain communities. So because of those budget cuts, do you all have a backlog of properties and how many that need to be demolished for safety reasons? And, what was the goal for FY22 in addressing some of those imminently dangerous and unsafe buildings?
So, thank you, first of all, for the kind words, and I share your feelings. I was somewhat, I might have said the same thing to Commissioner Perry when he decided to leave. He did a tremendous job for us and left us in really good stead. So, in some ways, I come off looking like I've done tremendous things, but in reality, it's just the things that he put in place to begin with. But with respect to the question about our Class 100 is about 63% of our total budget, our personnel costs, and that does not include fringe benefits. That's strict personnel costs. Our Class 200 is where we keep our demo funding, and you're correct. We gave some money up over the last fiscal year out of our demo budget. We were able to do that a little judiciously. We sort of fiercely guard that demo budget because, much like weather conditions and rainy seasons, they can change the dynamic of buildings very quickly and put a strain on our budget. And so we did give up some of that money. A lot of that was money we used for barging and barge board replacement, which is a function of demolition. I think what we're hoping and what we've been seeing is, I hesitate to call it a benefit of the pandemic, but one of the things we saw was that the cost of demo came down a little bit. So we're actually at about $13,000 for a structurally compromised like residential, which is not too bad. Competition has been good. It's not typically a field where there's a lot of competition. We'd love to see more in order to drive those prices down even further. But we get a pretty good bargain from the contractors that are doing that work. So we're hoping to be able to demolish some more buildings. We typically set a goal of around 150 or so ID. Those are our worst case buildings. Imminently dangerous. We typically set a goal for around 150. We've had that number down to below 100, which was a phenomenal amount of work to do. One of the things that I think we're seeing now is that time frame's elongating a little bit because part of the challenge is we have to go through the court process. The courts largely have not been open, although they have worked with us on the imminently dangerous and demolition orders that we've requested. So that has slowed the process slightly. The way we've always sort of planned this is our ideal goal is to get imminently dangerous buildings down to those that can be demolished within 90 days approximately, and then move to our unsafe building list. So for example, at any given time, we might have 140 ID buildings. We probably have close to 3,000 buildings that are designated unsafe. And these are buildings without intervention will either become ID or may even fall. So we've always wanted to sort of stabilize the ID and then begin to chip away at that unsafe building group, both by either demolishing or more effective court enforcement to get owners to comply, to take down their buildings or repair them. Now, one thing that we've seen over the past couple of years is the construction industry has been so strong in the city, as you all know. Sometimes it's not a good thing for folks in the neighborhood, certainly, but it's been so strong that a lot of those buildings are becoming reused or getting either demolished and rebuilt, and new structures put in their place, or they're getting renovated. So some of that is taking care of that list of 3,000 unsafes, but still. It's out there, it looms over us, and it's something that we want to get to be able to bring that number down, simply because a lot of those are buildings where there's no owner, there's no one interested in it, the building probably has very little value, and those are the ones we need to be able to either route through the court system and or upgrade to ID and then demolish.
Got it. Okay, so that'll be helpful to really drill down on that section of the budget for me when we move ahead in April or early May. And then secondly, if you could talk about any savings that you all have realized since the implementation of the Eclipse system and any of changes you've made in your departmental policies and or procedures related to COVID that you may have experienced, any unexpected savings that you all are going to continue moving forward.
So one of the things that probably the largest savings I think we're seeing is overtime. We basically have two types of overtime in the department. There's our sort of field inspector overtime. That's driven in large part by responses to emergencies, partial collapses, serious fires. Then there's also the other part of that, which is support for large city events. Welcome America, the various city parades and things that go on that require L&I presence during off hours on holidays. So that's one part of it. We saw a huge reduction since there was no city events for the past year. We saw that as a very large reduction. And the other part of our overtime expenditures is really our plans examination, our accelerated review. And so what the department did, again, under Commissioner Perry, was sort of raise the accelerated review cost, because one thing we're trying to do is, as I said earlier, about getting better information and getting better, more documented data. It's easier to get folks with their expectation. Hey, if you apply for a permit now, you can expect to have a review in X amount of days or a permit in X amount of days. And in doing so, you might, we were hoping to take away some of the need for folks using accelerated review. Right, because accelerated review is done mostly on overtime, and it comes out of the department's budget. Now it's reimbursable, but it does come out of the budget. So we've done that. We've basically stopped accelerated review for a large portion of what was happening, and this again was due to really the performance of our plans examination staff and the folks that work in the concourse who just absolutely adapted to working remotely. Even within remote work, we have two types. Remote work for plans examination, for example, is work from home. It's work that they can do home, and it seems like that's working out really well and something we should really consider about exploring further. And then we have a different type of remote work for our field inspectors, which is they're in the field already. That's their remote, and sort of limiting their impact to the district offices because there's potential for spread and things like that. So the biggest one I think is overtime. The next one I think we might consider was. We saw some savings in some efficiencies. We had to, because for the very beginning of the pandemic, virtually everything was shut down. We switched to an enforcement role, and that enforcement was the mayor's executive order, the governor's orders. And so we weren't really doing a lot of interior inspections, and we saw those kinds of complaints drop. So we picked up some efficiency by cutting out some of that inspections, and also by the implementation of the system, which is allowing us to be a little bit more efficient. Now, we have another phase going live in another month or two, the mobile inspection phase, to allow our inspectors to spend more time in the field, actually in doing inspections, rather than in the district loading information and all that other stuff. So we expect that there'll be some efficiencies picked up there. But overtime was definitely the big one for us.
Okay, and it would be helpful for me, and I'm not sure if other members of the committee would like this information, to quantify those realized savings.
Sure.
You could just quantify them, because obviously some of the things are going to change going into the next year when we go back to, whatever the new normal looks like, and having, outdoor events in the city, and just planning and looking ahead. So some of that will not be able to be maintained, but some of the other efficiencies that you talked about, I think, can be maintained. So if you could quantify that by each line item. So you mentioned OT, efficiencies, lack of large events. If you could just quantify that for us, that would be helpful. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I apologize, I have to depart for other important council business, but I wanted to thank you again for your work on this hearing.
Thank you, council member. Thanks for being here and all your great questions. Great job.
Thank you.
So, Acting Commissioner, I'm curious when it's not going to be acting anymore, but I won't ask that question. But I had to throw that in. Anyway, thank you for your work. Thank you for your department's work. You guys are doing a good job. Think about the ideas I mentioned to you about how do we get more performance, better objectives, better goal reaching within the same budget. That's really our goal of this hearing, is to measure that. And so if we could come up with really great strategies in different areas on cutting down the time frames and having a time frame established, I think it'll go very far for people who apply for different things. They understand what the time frame is and set it out there in the beginning.
Yes, sir. Will do.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
I don't believe there's any public commentary or public witnesses today. But I do want to thank each witness for being here today and for your ongoing oversight of our city's finances. We hope to have you back here real soon. And if there are no additional witnesses, doesn't appear to be, I'll move to conclude this hearing. And also want to thank everyone again for being here. Is to measure the performance of different departments. These 5 departments make up 50% when you include the fringe benefits of our overall budget. And we want to make sure that we're getting the performance and reaching our objectives for the investments we're making. And whatever we can do to improve, whether it's 10%, 15, or 20% in every area, that needs to be our goal. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to the witnesses today. And thank you for those that are listening. Have a great day. Thank you.